James Chen stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror of his tiny studio apartment in Los Angeles' Koreatown, his trembling hands clutching an expensive makeup brush that cost him a week's worth of tips. At 26, he was younger than most of his peers in the competitive world of celebrity makeup artistry, but his talent was undeniable, even if his path to success was anything but certain. Born in Taipei to working-class parents, James had arrived in America 4 years ago with nothing but a tourist visa and a dream. Where others saw impossibility, James saw opportunity. Through countless hours of watching YouTube tutorials, practicing on willing friends, and working multiple jobs, he had slowly built a reputation for his innovative techniques that blended Asian and Western aesthetics. His tiny apartment told the story of his journey. Makeup brushes were thousands of dollars carefully arranged beside packets of instant noodles, high-end cosmetic sharing space with carefully counted tip money. Each morning, he would wake before dawn to practice his craft, transforming his own face again and again before heading to his day job at a Korean beauty supply store. Every dollar he could spare, after sending money home to his family, went into his kit. His dream of becoming a celebrity makeup artist sustained him through endless double shifts and missed meals. 15 miles away, in a world that might as well have been another planet, Elizabeth Beth Walker was conducting her own morning ritual in the marble-clad bathroom of her Bel Air mansion. At 45, she fought a daily battle against time, her arsenal consisting of creams that cost more than James's monthly rent and treatments that could feed a family for a year. The former flight attendant turned trophy wife had spent 17 years learning to navigate the treacherous waters of Los Angeles high society, but her middle-class roots still haunted her like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. Richard Walker, her husband of 17 years, had built Walker Dynamics into a tech empire worth hundreds of millions, but lately he seemed to look through her rather than at her. Their conversations, when they happened at all, centered around charity galas and board meetings. Beth found herself increasingly alone in their sprawling mansion, surrounded by every luxury money could buy, yet starving for genuine connection. Her carefully maintained beauty felt like both shield and prison, a mask she couldn't afford to let slip. Neither James nor Beth could have known that their paths were about to cross in a way that would lead to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately death. Where James saw a chance at his American dream, Beth would find a dangerous reminder of her own lost youth. Their shared understanding of beauty's power to transform would draw them together, but it would be their differences that would tear them apart in ways neither could have imagined. For James, each day in America was a delicate balance between ambition and survival, his precarious immigration status adding an edge of desperation to every decision. One mistake, one wrong move, could send him back to Taipei, his dreams shattered before they had truly begun. Yet it was precisely this desperate hunger to succeed that would catch Beth's eye, awakening something in her that had long laid dormant beneath layers of expensive makeup and social conditioning. The phone call that would change James Chen's life forever came on a Tuesday afternoon while he was restocking shelves at the Korean beauty supply store, his hands trembling as he answered the unfamiliar number. Jessica Park, one of La's most sought-after makeup artists, had food poisoning and needed someone to cover a charity gala at the Beverly Hills Hotel that evening. A mutual friend had recommended James as a last resort. The pay for one night was more than he made in 2 weeks at the store. James spent his lunch break watching YouTube tutorials of red carpet looks, his phone propped against a bottle of shampoo in the store's break room. This was his chance, the moment he had been preparing for since arriving in America 4 years ago. He couldn't afford to fail. That evening, as he entered the hotel's grand ballroom, his makeup kit clutched like a shield, his heart pounding so hard he was sure the wealthy patrons could hear it. The first few clients were simple touch-ups for already perfectly made-up socialites who barely acknowledged his existence. But then came Catherine Morrison, an aging actress known for her demands for perfection. James's hands, steady now in the way they only were when he was working, transformed her face using techniques he'd learned from his grandmother in Taipei, combined with Western contouring. The result was subtle yet stunning. Catherine's gasp of pleasure when she looked in the mirror drew attention from nearby guests. Beth Walker had been watching the young makeup artist work, fascinated by his intense concentration, the way his skilled hands move with both precision and artistry. When Catherine emerged, looking years younger, Beth felt a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. Here was something new, something different from the usual parade of overpriced mediocrity she encountered in her social circle. Their first interaction was brief, James nearly dropping his brush when Beth approached his makeshift station, her Cartier necklace alone worth more than everything he owned. His accent thicker than usual with nervousness, he explained his technique. But Beth wasn't interested in just another touch-up. She saw something in his innovative approach that sparked an idea. Watching him work, Beth was transported back to her own youth, when everything seemed possible. Before marriage to Richard had gilded her cage, when she too had been an outsider looking in. James's passion reminded her of the girl she'd been at 28, serving drinks in first class, dreaming of a bigger life. She saw in his eyes the same hunger that had once driven her. Before leaving the gala, Beth handed James her private card, not her husband's social secretary's number, but her personal line. "I'd like to book a private session," she said, "and perhaps introduce you to some people." James stared at the embossed card as if it might disappear, his hand trembling slightly as he took it. This was it, his first real connection to the world he'd been trying to penetrate for years. 2 days later, James arrived at the Walker mansion in his used Toyota that had seen better days, the security guard eyeing him suspiciously until Beth's housekeeper confirmed his appointment. The driveway alone was bigger than his entire apartment building. He clutched his kit tighter as he walked up marble steps that probably cost more than his parents' house in Taipei. Beth was waiting in her private sitting room, a space larger than James's entire apartment, filled with artwork that he suspected cost more than he'd earn in a lifetime. But as they began to talk, the opulence faded into the background. Beth surprised him by asking about his journey to America, his dreams, his struggle. Maybe it was something in her eyes, a hint of remembered hardship, or maybe it was just a need to finally tell someone who might understand. But James found himself opening up about the loneliness of being an immigrant, the weight of his family's expectations, the constant fear of failure. Beth, in turn, shared stories of her own climb from middle-class Cincinnati, her early days as a flight attendant, the persistent feeling of being an imposter in her current world. As James worked, transforming Beth's already beautiful face, they found themselves sharing more than just beauty tips. Both understood what it meant to be an outsider looking in. Both knew the cost of pursuing dreams that others thought impossible. Beth saw in James a raw talent and determination she'd once possessed before luxury had softened her edges. James saw in Beth not just another wealthy client, but someone who might actually understand his struggle. The session stretched from the planned hour to nearly 3, neither wanting to break the unexpected connection they'd formed. Beth found herself sharing things she hadn't told anyone, not even her therapist, about the isolation of her current life, the way Richard's success had slowly erased her own identity. James spoke of his parents' sacrifice, how every cent he saved went back to them, how he practiced his craft late into the night because he couldn't bear the thought of failing them. Before James left, Beth made good on her promise to connect him with her circle. But more than that, she offered to mentor him in navigating the complex social waters of Los Angeles high society. "I can help you avoid the mistakes I made," she said, and James, eager for any advantage, grateful for any guidance, accepted without hesitation, neither of them recognizing the dangerous intimacy they were creating. That night, in his tiny apartment, James stared at the check Beth had written for his services, more money than he usually made in a week. His mind raced with possibilities. Finally, a real chance to establish himself in the world he'd been trying to enter since arriving in America. Across town, in her marble bathroom, Beth studied her reflection. James's artistry had made her look younger, more vibrant, but it was the light in her own eyes that truly transformed her. Both of them slept poorly that night, their minds filled with thoughts of their unexpected connection, neither suspecting that this was the beginning of a path that would lead them both to destruction. Their shared status as outsiders created a bond that would prove far more dangerous than either could have imagined. Beth's desire to mentor and James's need for guidance were laying a foundation for a relationship that would eventually shatter both their worlds. In the weeks that followed, Beth began recommending James to her friends, carefully orchestrating his introduction into her social circle. She took pride in watching him grow more confident with each client, believing she was helping someone avoid the painful lessons she'd learned. But beneath her mentorship, something else was growing, something neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Their weekly sessions became longer, their conversations deeper, their connections stronger, until the lines between mentor and mentee, patron and artist began to blur in ways that would eventually lead them both to ruin within weeks of Beth's patronage. James Chen found himself thrust into a world he'd only glimpsed through magazine pages and YouTube videos. The Walker name opened doors that had seemed forever sealed to a young immigrant from Taiwan. Beth orchestrated his rise with the precision of a symphony conductor, introducing him first to her closest friends, then to wider circles of Los Angeles elite. His unique techniques, blending Eastern and Western aesthetics, caught the attention of aging socialites desperate for something new. Each success felt like a dream to James, his phone constantly buzzing with requests from women whose names he'd once only seen in gossip columns. His tiny apartment slowly filling with expensive thank you gifts, and his bank account finally showing numbers that made his monthly wire transfers to Taipei less painful. But it was Beth's proud smile that he found himself working for. Her subtle nods of approval were worth more than all the designer handbags his other clients gifted him. Beth watched his transformation from nervous immigrant to confident artist with a complexity of emotions she wasn't ready to acknowledge. She found herself scheduling more sessions than necessary, sometimes just for minor touch-ups that didn't require his skills. Their appointments stretched longer and longer as makeup application gave way to deep conversations about art, dreams, and loneliness in their respective worlds. Richard Walker barely noticed his wife's increasing absences, too consumed with a hostile takeover that kept him at the office until midnight. When he did notice Beth's renewed energy, her glowing complexion, he attributed it to whatever new treatment she was trying, never suspecting that his wife's transformation had nothing to do with skincare and everything to do with a young artist who had awakened something long dormant in her. James's success brought changes to his life beyond just financial security. He moved to a better apartment, still in Koreatown, but with a proper makeup studio where he could receive clients. Beth had helped him design the space, her expert eye for luxury transforming the modest room into something that would make his wealthy clients comfortable while still maintaining his authentic style. The day he received his first celebrity booking, a rising television actress who'd seen his work on one of Beth's friends, he called Beth before even telling his parents. Their relationship shifted so gradually that neither could later point to the exact moment when mentorship became something more dangerous. Their weekly sessions became daily texts, sharing small victories and private jokes. Beth found herself driving to Koreatown at odd hours, claiming she needed emergency touch-ups but really just craving the way James looked at her, like she was more than just another rich man's wife. The first kiss happened in Beth's private makeup room, after a particularly successful session where James had transformed her for a major charity gala. Neither could say who moved first, but suddenly, his brush was on the floor, and her carefully applied lipstick was smeared. James found in Beth's arms the acceptance he'd been searching for since leaving Taipei, while Beth discovered in his youth and hunger a reflection of her own buried desires. Their worlds began to merge in secret meetings and stolen moments. James introduced Beth to the vibrant life of his immigrant community, taking her to hidden restaurants where elderly Korean women served soup so spicy it made her eyes water. They went to late-night karaoke rooms where nobody cared about her last name or her husband's bank account. Beth found herself craving these glimpses into James's world, where everything felt real in a way her sanitized existence in Bel Air never did. For James, Beth became his first real connection in America beyond the superficial friendships he'd formed with other struggling immigrants. He found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone, about the shame of leaving his younger sister to care for their aging parents, about the nights he considered giving up and going home, about the crushing loneliness of pursuing his dreams in a country that often seemed determined to reject him. Beth listened with an understanding that came from her own journey from outsider to insider. Beth, in turn, confided in James about the emptiness of her privileged life, the way her former friends from her flight attendant days had slowly stopped calling, unable to bridge the gap her marriage had created. The crushing pressure to maintain the illusion of perfection in a world where every flaw was gossip fodder. With James, she could let the mask slip and be the small-town girl who still sometimes felt overwhelmed by the life she married into. Their affair, if it could be called that yet, existed in stolen moments and lingering touches, neither willing to cross the final line but both aware they were dancing closer to it with each passing day. James began scheduling his last appointment of the day for Beth, knowing their sessions would stretch late into the evening. Beth found increasingly creative excuses to visit his studio, Rich's distraction with work making her deceptions easier than they should have been. The physical attraction between them grew with the intensity of a slow-burning fire fed by their shared secrets and understanding. James found himself studying Beth's face, not just as an artist, but as a man, memorizing the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed genuinely, the subtle differences between her public smile and her private one. Beth caught herself watching James work, noticing the graceful movements of his hands, the intensity of his concentration, the way his accent grew stronger when he was tired or emotional. Their different backgrounds, which had initially drawn them together as mentor and mentee, now created an almost electric attraction. James's youth and hunger awakening something in Beth she'd thought long buried, while Beth's sophistication and vulnerability stirred protective instincts in James he'd never known he possessed. She taught him to navigate the complex social waters of Los Angeles high society, showing him which wines to order, which forks to use, how to turn down clients without giving offense. He, in turn, showed her a world beyond her gilded cage, took her to art shows in converted warehouses where young immigrants displayed work that would never hang in the galleries she frequented, introduced her to street food that put her private chef to shame, taught her to see beauty and imperfection in a way that challenged everything she'd learned in her years as a trophy wife. Their worlds collided in secret meetings and stolen moments, each encounter adding another layer to their complicated relationship. Beth found herself buying clothes that would blend in Koreatown, keeping them hidden in the back of her massive closet. James learned to move through Beth's world with increasing confidence, his natural charm enhanced by her careful coaching, their separate spheres beginning to blur in dangerous ways. Neither wanted to acknowledge the growing risk their relationship posed to everything they'd built. Beth's carefully constructed life in Los Angeles high society, James's rising career that depended so heavily on his reputation and discretion. They told themselves they could maintain the balance between mentorship and attraction, between friendship and something more dangerous. But each lingering touch, each shared secret, each private joke pulled them closer to a point of no return. Their time together took on a dreamlike quality. Removed from their regular lives, in Beth's private makeup room or James's studio, they created a world that existed outside of social expectations and obligations. A space where age, class, and background ceased to matter, where they could be simply themselves. But dreams, by their nature, must end, and reality, with all its complications, was closing in on their carefully maintained illusion of control. The transformation of their relationship from professional to personal, from mentorship to something more complex and dangerous, was as gradual as it was inevitable. Like artists working in different mediums, they had created something beautiful but ultimately fragile. Their shared understanding of beauty's power to transform becoming the very thing that would transform them in ways neither had anticipated or prepared for. As summer turned to fall, their careful dance of attraction and restraint began to falter, the heat between them building to an intensity that would soon consume all their carefully constructed boundaries. Neither James nor Beth could have known that their greatest transformation was yet to come, or that the price of their passion would be paid not just in broken vows but in broken lives. The first crack in James and Beth's carefully constructed fantasy appeared during a late-night video call with his parents in Taipei. His mother's excited chatter about finding him a suitable wife back home made his stomach twist with guilt. At 26, he was already considered late to marry by traditional standards. His recent success made him an even more attractive prospect to families with eligible daughters. The weight of his parents' expectations pressed against his chest as he forced himself to smile and nod. Across town, in her marble bathroom, Beth stared at old family photos. Her son's college graduation picture made her age difference with James suddenly nauseating. The boy she'd raised was the same age as her lover. The reality of their situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. She'd been so caught up in the intoxication of their connection that she'd almost forgotten what she was risking, what she was taking from someone young enough to be her child. James's traditional values began to war with his growing feelings for Beth. Each success in his career felt somehow tainted by the secret they shared. His mother's weekly calls became exercises in evasion, her questions about his personal life making him stutter and stumble in ways that raised maternal suspicions. He found himself pulling away from his community, the judgment he imagined in their eyes too heavy to bear. Beth watched his internal struggle with a mixture of guilt and possessiveness, her own feelings complicated by the knowledge that she was corrupting something pure. Her protection of James became increasingly controlling. Each new client, particularly younger ones, was subjected to careful scrutiny. Her introductions now came with subtle strings attached, her mentorship transforming into a gilded cage. Their affair grew more complex as James's success attracted attention from the entertainment industry. Celebrities were drawn to his unique techniques and fresh perspective. Beth's carefully curated introductions opened doors, but each new opportunity came weighted with obligation. His dependence on her connections made him vulnerable in ways he was only beginning to understand. The immigration issue hung over them like a sword of Damocles. James's visa status remained precarious. One wrong move, one vindictive client, one jealous competitor, and he could be sent back to Taipei, destroying everything he'd built. Beth's protection was both a blessing and a chain, binding him closer to her even as he began to feel the need to break free. Their worlds, which had seemed to merge so seamlessly, began to show their fundamental incompatibility. James struggled to understand the casual betrayals of Los Angeles society, the way Beth could kiss someone then destroy their reputation with a whispered word. His traditional values clashed with the moral flexibility required to survive in her world. Richard Walker finally looked up from his business empire long enough to notice his wife's obsession with her pet project. His questions about James became more pointed, his suggestions that perhaps it was time for Beth to find a new cause making her hands shake with barely controlled panic. The precariousness of their situation became increasingly clear. At a high-profile industry event, James watched Beth work the room with practiced ease, suddenly seeing her through new eyes. He understood for the first time the calculation behind her warmth, the power she wielded so casually. What had once seemed like protection now felt like possession. His success, which had felt earned, now tasted like dependency. Beth's control began to slip as James's client list grew increasingly independent of her influence. Young celebrities sought him out on their own merit. Her response was to tighten her grip, scheduling more frequent sessions, demanding constant updates. Her support transformed into surveillance. Her guidance became demands. James's naivety about American relationships led to dangerous missteps. His innocent mentions of Beth in interviews set gossip blogs buzzing. His inability to navigate the complex social politics of Los Angeles nearly destroyed carefully cultivated connections more than once. Only Beth's quick intervention saved his reputation. The power shift became impossible to ignore as James's star rose in the beauty industry. His unique perspective and talent earned him recognition beyond Beth's circle of influence. She watched with growing anxiety as he began to spread his wings, her fear of losing him manifesting in increasingly desperate attempts to maintain control. Richard's attention to his wife's project forced them to be more careful. Their meetings became less frequent, more rushed. The passion that had once felt liberating now weighed with fear and desperation. Beth's makeup sessions stretched longer as she tried to hold onto moments that were slipping away like sand through her fingers. The cultural divide between them widened as James found himself caught between two worlds. His parents' increasing pressure to return home for arranged meetings with potential brides made him realize how far he'd strayed from their expectations. Meanwhile, Beth's world, with its casual acceptance of infidelity, made him question everything he'd been raised to believe. Their careful dance began to falter. Steps that had once been seamless became clumsy and forced. Beth's attempts to maintain control grew more obvious. James's need for independence became more urgent. The beauty they created together took on a darker edge as the cost of their choices became impossible to ignore. Late one night in his studio, James finally began to understand the depth of the hole he'd dug himself into. His dream of success had become a complex web of obligations and secrets, each thread leading back to Beth. Each triumph was tainted by the fear of exposure. The immigrant community he'd once found comfort in now felt distant. His connection to his roots was fraying. Beth's growing possessiveness manifested in subtle ways. The client she steered away from him, the conversation she interrupted, the event she insisted he attend or avoid. Her manipulation was so skillful that he often didn't recognize it until later. Alone in his apartment, he'd replay their interactions, seeing the puppet strings he'd mistaken for support. Their relationship began to show signs of strain that neither could ignore. James's growing resistance to Beth's control met with increasing reluctance, while she responded with emotional manipulation, reminding him of everything she'd done for his career. The implicit threat in her support became clearer with each passing day. As autumn turned to winter, James began to see his reflection differently. No longer just the ambitious immigrant chasing his American dream. He saw someone caught in a web of his own making. The success he'd achieved was tainted by the price he'd paid for it. Meanwhile, Beth faced her own reflection with increasing despair, seeing not just the signs of aging she'd always feared, but the evidence of a desperation that threatened to destroy everything she'd built. The breaking point approached with the inevitability of a gathering storm. Their separate worlds pulled them in opposite directions, even as they clung to their connection with increasing desperation. Neither was willing to be the first to let go, both knowing that when the break came, it would shatter more than just their relationship. It would destroy the careful facades they built. Their separate dreams of transformation would end in a destruction neither could have anticipated or survived. The conversation that sealed James Chen's fate happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in his Koreatown studio. His hands trembled as he told Beth about his decision to confess everything to Richard. The guilt of betraying not just his lover's husband, but everything his parents had sacrificed for him, became too heavy to bear. "I can't live like this anymore, Beth," he said, his accent thicker with emotion. "My parents, my community, everything I was raised to be, I'm betraying it all." Beth's face, drained of color, had carefully applied makeup suddenly looking garish under the harsh studio lights. The words, which had hung in the air unspoken for weeks, now threatened to pull everything she had worked so carefully to build apart. "You will destroy everything," she whispered. "Not just us, but your career, everything we've built." She reminded him of his precarious immigration status, the carefully crafted web of connections that kept him in America. James had reached his breaking point. The weight of his traditional values was crushing him beneath layers of guilt and shame. He couldn't bear to face another video call with his parents. He couldn't stand the pride in their voices when they talked about their successful son building his American dream through honest, hard work. The next morning, he sent Beth a text saying he was going to Richard's office. He said he had to make things right. Beth's panic manifested in a flurry of calls to her most trusted confidant, Sophia Torres, her personal assistant of 15 years, the woman who had helped cover countless indiscretions. Sophia listened as Beth's carefully constructed world threatened to crumble, suggesting she knew people who could handle the situation discreetly. 3 glasses of wine deep, Beth nodded, not fully understanding what she was setting in motion. What happened next would later be pieced together through security footage, credit card receipts, and cell phone records. James arrived at his studio late that night, responding to an urgent text from a client. A figure in dark clothing entered shortly after him. A brief confrontation was captured by grainy surveillance cameras. Then nothing for several hours, until the same figure left alone. The body was discovered by the cleaning lady the next morning. James Chen had apparently taken his own life with an overdose of prescription medications. A carefully typed note expressed guilt over an affair with a married woman and his inability to live with the shame. The police, noting the expensive paper and professional formatting, conducted a cursory investigation before ruling it suicide. Another immigrant dream ended in despair. Detective Sarah Martinez's instincts were triggered by small inconsistencies. The suicide note was printed on paper no struggling makeup artist would own. Prescription bottles came from pharmacies across Los Angeles. James's makeup kit was packed as if preparing for a client, not someone planning to end their life. But the immigrant community closed ranks. Fear of deportation was stronger than any desire for justice. The Korean restaurant owner who might have seen something the night James died suddenly couldn't remember anything. The elderly woman who lived next door to his studio developed selective amnesia about unusual sounds. Martinez watched as potential witnesses disappeared into the shadows, their silence bought with fear and generations of learned distrust. Beth's guilt manifested in increasingly public ways. She established a foundation supporting immigrant artists, sponsored visa applications for aspiring makeup artists, and championed minority-owned businesses. Her sudden passion for immigrant causes raised eyebrows in her social circle. Richard attributed her behavior to grief over losing her protege, never suspecting the deeper currents of guilt and fear driving his wife's newfound philanthropy. Paper trails proved harder to hide than witnesses. Detective Martinez, following the money, discovered large withdrawals from Beth's private account, traced to offshore entities. Payments were made to a consulting firm that existed only on paper. Phone records showed calls between Sophia and known fixers in the weeks before James's death. Each piece of evidence led closer to the truth. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses revealed more details. A black SUV circling the block 3 times before parking in a blind spot. A figure matching the description of a former military operative known only as Wolf entered James's building, carrying a small bag. He left hours later without it. The timing matched perfectly with the estimated time of death. Martinez's investigation uncovered more inconsistencies. The prescription drugs in James's system weren't available at any pharmacy he'd ever visited. His last text messages showed no signs of suicidal thoughts. His calendar was marked with appointments for the following week, including a major celebrity client. Everything pointing to a man looking forward, not preparing to end his life. Beth's carefully constructed facade began to crack under the weight of the investigation. Her charitable works took on a frantic quality, as if she could somehow balance the scales of karma through donations and good deeds. Her hands shook as she cut ribbons at immigrant art galleries, her voice trembling as she gave speeches about supporting young talent. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a small-time drug dealer arrested on unrelated charges, offering information in exchange for leniency. He described overhearing a conversation in a bar about a hit ordered by a wealthy woman on her young lover. The description of the supposed hitman matched security footage from James's building. Martinez now had the pieces to the puzzle. The question was no longer if Beth Walker had been involved in James Chen's death, but how deep the involvement went, and who else might have been complicit in the fatal chain of events. The glittering facade of high society, the glitter of fame, fortune, and power, was suddenly tainted by the violence and desperation lying beneath the surface. Beth's world, once so carefully curated, was now unraveling. The storm that she had tried so hard to avoid was crashing down around her, and as the investigation gathered pace, it was becoming clear that nothing, and no one, was going to stop it. Detective Sarah Martinez dug deeper, uncovering connections between Sophia Torres and Wolf. Cell phone records placed the former military operative near James's studio the night of his death. Security footage showed him entering and leaving the building. Bank records revealed payments routed through multiple shell companies, all leading back to Beth's personal accounts. As the investigation closed in, Beth's world began to unravel. Her social circle, sensing a scandal, started to distance themselves. Richard, finally noticing his wife's deteriorating state, hired private investigators who uncovered far more than he had bargained for. The foundation Beth had established in James's memory, a noble effort to turn her guilt into charity, had become, in essence, a monument to her remorse. Yet its charitable works couldn't wash away the blood on her hands. Sophia broke first. Faced with the overwhelming evidence of her role in arranging Wolf's services, she traded testimony for leniency. She described how Beth's panic had set in motion events that spiraled beyond anyone's control, how a plan to discourage James from confessing had evolved into something far more sinister. The wealthy socialite's desperation had turned deadly. The case exploded across headlines, destroying reputations, careers, and lives. Beth's arrest sent shockwaves through Los Angeles society. Richard's empire, built on years of power, prestige, and influence, began to crumble beneath the weight of scandal. The immigrant community James had tried so hard to transcend mourned him, but they also saw him as a cautionary tale about the price of the American dream. The dream that had lured him in with promises of success, only to betray him in the end. Wolf's capture in Mexico led to final revelations about James's last hours. In a chilling account, he described how the young makeup artist had begged for his life. James had promised to disappear, to return to Taiwan, anything to survive. The hitman's testimony painted a picture of a desperate young man who never understood the deadly game he had stumbled into, and the lethal forces that had been at play all along. Beth's trial became a media sensation, exposing the dark underbelly of Los Angeles society, where beauty masked corruption, and dreams of transformation often ended in destruction. The story of a young immigrant and an aging socialite, both obsessed with perfection, was laid bare, leading them down a path of mutual self-destruction. Their shared ambition had resulted in ruin, not just for them, but for everyone they had touched. Detective Martinez's final report laid bare the tragic costs of cultural misunderstanding, ambition, and obsession. James Chen's death became a symbol of the broader, more painful consequences of pursuing the American dream at any price. The wealthy society wife who thought she could control everything. The ambitious immigrant who just wanted to make his parents proud. Their fatal connection destroyed not just themselves, but everyone in their orbit. Richard, devastated by the betrayal and the public humiliation, filed for divorce. As Beth awaited trial, a carefully constructed world of privilege and power crumbled like the makeup that had once transformed James's clients. Evidence mounted of other secrets, other crimes, and the investigation began to expose decades of corruption beneath the glittering surface of Los Angeles high society. In the end, justice came at a heavy price. Beth was sentenced to life in prison, while Wolf accepted a plea deal for 20 years. Sophia, who had only been a secondary player in the scheme, was sentenced to 5 years for her role in arranging the murder. The foundations of power and privilege that had protected them for so long finally crumbled beneath the weight of truth. James's parents, in the quiet dignity of their grief, received their son's ashes, choosing not to accept Beth's offer of financial compensation. Instead, they established a small scholarship in their son's name for immigrant artists, a legacy of hope rising from the ashes of tragedy. Their forgiveness, however, was harder to bear than any punishment the courts could impose. Detective Martinez, who had witnessed so much destruction, kept James's makeup brush on her desk as a reminder. Behind every headline, every scandal, every closed case, were real people, people with dreams, fears, and hopes for a better life. Their lives could be transformed or destroyed by the choices they made in pursuit of their American dreams. The price of beauty, it turned out, was far higher than anyone had imagined. The story broke first in Korea Daily, a small Asian American newspaper that had followed James Chen's rise in the beauty industry. Their headline was stark and unforgiving. Immigrant makeup artist's death reveals dark side of American dream. The article detailed not just James's murder, but the broader pattern of exploitation hidden beneath Los Angeles's glossy surface. Mainstream media initially ignored the story, until WeChat and Korean-language social media platforms exploded with first-hand accounts from other immigrant service providers. Their stories of abuse, manipulation, and exploitation at the hands of wealthy clients created a wave that couldn't be ignored. Suddenly, James Chen wasn't just another tragic headline, but a symbol of a broken system. Beth's world crumbled with spectacular speed. Her carefully curated social media accounts were flooded with accusations from other immigrants who had suffered similar, though less deadly, manipulation at her hands. Former housekeepers, gardeners, personal trainers, all shared stories of threats, visa manipulation, and psychological abuse. Her arrest made international news, particularly in Asian media outlets, which focused on the power dynamics that had led to James's death. The investigation expanded beyond James's murder, revealing decades of systematic exploitation within Los Angeles' wealthy enclaves. Richard Walker's company was found to have regularly used visa status to control immigrant employees. Beth's social circle was exposed for similar practices. The scandal reached into the highest levels of society as more victims found the courage to speak out. James's parents, watching from Taipei as their son became a rallying cry for immigrant rights, showed quiet dignity in interviews. Their restraint in the face of tragedy touched hearts across communities. They spoke not of revenge but of change, hoping their son's death would protect others from similar fates. Their forgiveness made Beth's crimes seem even more monstrous. Beth's trial became a media sensation, not just in America but across Asia. Coverage focused on the broader implications of power, wealth, and immigration. A tearful confession revealed a culture of entitled abuse that had become so normalized that its participants no longer recognized its horror. She spoke of other wealthy friends who used similar tactics, how threats about visa status had become casual conversation at charity galas. In response to the growing scandal, the Asian American community established the James Chen Foundation, dedicated to protecting immigrant workers in the beauty and service industries. The foundation offered legal support, visa assistance, and advocacy for those trapped in exploitative relationships. Its first act was to create a hotline where immigrants could report abuse without fear of deportation. The foundation's work revealed patterns that had persisted for generations. Immigrant workers, particularly in beauty and personal service industries, were subjected to psychological manipulation, visa threats, and emotional abuse. Their dreams of American success had often been used as weapons against them. James's death brought to light what many had suffered in silence. Beth's sentencing brought no joy to James's family, but their presence in the courtroom served as a powerful reminder of the human cost of privilege and exploitation. They declined to speak at the sentencing, instead allowing the foundation created in their son's name to become his voice and legacy. Change came slowly but significantly to Los Angeles' wealthy enclaves. Country clubs revised their treatment of service staff, and visa sponsorship practices came under scrutiny. Social circles that had once treated immigrant workers as disposable props were forced to confront their complicity in a system that had enabled Beth's actions. James's story became required reading in sociology classes, with his case study used to illustrate the intersection of immigration, wealth, and power in modern America. His death forced conversations about the true cost of beauty and success in a system built on immigrant dreams and wealthy excess. The foundation's work expanded beyond Los Angeles, establishing chapters in other cities with large immigrant populations. Their work revealed similar patterns of abuse and exploitation across the country. Each new case added to James's legacy, while ensuring his death served as more than just another tragic headline. Beth's detailed confession, published from prison, became a bestseller, not for its lurid details but for its unflinching examination of privilege and its abuse. The proceeds went to the foundation. Though James's parents refused to touch the money, their dignity intact even in victory. 5 years after James's death, his parents returned to Los Angeles for the opening of the James Chen Arts Center, a space dedicated to showcasing immigrant artists and providing free beauty industry training to newcomers. The center became a symbol of transformation and hope, rising from tragedy. Detective Martinez attended the opening ceremony, keeping her promise to ensure James's story wouldn't be forgotten. She watched as his parents cut the ribbon, their quiet strength a reminder that justice, while slow, could still transform pain into purpose. Their son's dream of making beauty accessible to all was finally realized, though not in the way anyone could have imagined. The beauty industry itself underwent significant changes. Major brands established new protocols for working with immigrant artists. Immigration status was no longer weaponized against vulnerable workers. James's death forced a reckoning long overdue in a world built on immigrant talent, but often negligent in its protection. As Los Angeles society slowly recovered from the scandal, the lessons of James Chen's death remained. Immigrant workers found their voices. Wealthy patrons learned the limits of their power. The American dream itself transformed by the recognition that its pursuit should never cost a life.
Today, we delve into a chilling case from Naples, Florida, in January 2005. A young man's dreams were abruptly ended in a scheme fueled by obsession, envy, and an intense longing for youth. Ethan Wright was a 20-year-old college student thriving in Naples, a locale renowned for its lively retirees, seasonal visitors, and the hidden lives of young individuals who cater to them. Ethan was enthusiastic about coffee and aspired to own his own cafe someday. Known among friends for his deep interest in coffee culture, he loved crafting new blends and perfecting his brewing techniques. Ethan was enrolled at a local community college, focusing on business management to pave the way for his cafe dreams. He worked part-time as a barista at a popular local coffee shop, where his innovative creations were starting to get noticed for their unique flavors, often challenging Maple's preference for traditional brews. Ethan was well regarded by his peers, celebrated for his amiable nature, and his knack for making those around him feel at ease. His engaging personality wasn't just a hit with his friends. He also charmed the older clientele at high-end coffee tasting events, where his skills were in high demand. Ethan was bold and spirited, always on the lookout for new connections and adventures in life, love, and especially in coffee. In the days leading up to his tragic end, Ethan was thrilled about a new opportunity to showcase his latest coffee blend at one of Maple's premier events. His excitement was palpable in every discussion with friends and colleagues. He aimed to carve out a name for himself in the bustling cafe scene and saw this event as a breakthrough. Ethan harbored grand ambitions. He dreamed of traveling the world to explore diverse coffee cultures and someday competing in national barista competitions. He even mused about moving to Seattle to immerse himself in its famed coffee scene. Yet, all his aspirations were halted by a sinister plot that unfolded unnoticed. On the morning of January 15, 2005, Maples was just starting to stir under a clear, cool dawn. Around 8 a.m., Ethan Wright's roommate, Alex Reed, sensed that something was amiss. Ethan hadn't left for his early shift at the local coffee shop, which was out of character. Ethan was usually up with the first light, ready to embrace the day. Alex, concerned, tapped on Ethan's bedroom door, but got no reply. Deciding to check, what he discovered would forever be imprinted in his memory. Ethan lay on his bed, motionless, his skin pale and lifeless. The room, typically filled with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee or experimental blends, was now unsettlingly silent, marked by a faint, distressing odor. No signs of struggle were evident, no furniture appended or items displaced. It appeared as though Ethan had simply drifted off to sleep and never awakened. Shock rooted Alex to the spot as he stared in disbelief. Panic quickly set in. He scrambled for his phone and dialed 911, his voice breaking as he shakily recounted finding his best friend unresponsive. When the paramedics arrived, they confirmed Alex's worst fears. Ethan was dead. Police soon followed, their sirens cutting through the morning quiet, the flashing lights casting eerie shadows inside the modest apartment. The scene felt surreal, the morning's tranquility shattered by the stark reality of death. Alex, overwhelmed by shock, struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. The responding officers gently urged him out to start their inquiry. Later at the police station, he was visibly distraught, unable to fathom the enormity of his loss. Ethan's body was transported to the local medical examiner for an autopsy as the investigation into his enigmatic death commenced. Unbeknownst to all, this was merely the start of a complex, sinister tale. The Naples Police Department responded swiftly to the 911 call from Ethan Wright's apartment on the morning of January 15, 2005. Leading the charge was Detective James McCarthy, a veteran officer known for his thorough investigative skills. The scene at Ethan's apartment was eerily silent. Everything appeared untouched, and Ethan's body lay peacefully, hinting at an unnatural cause of death. As McCarthy and his team entered Ethan's bedroom, the absence of visible violence struck them. No blood, no weapons, no signs of a struggle. Ethan appeared to have simply fallen asleep and not woken up. However, upon closer inspection, Detective McCarthy grew suspicious of more sinister undertone. Ethan's pale complexion and the slight bluish hue around his lips suggested possible poisoning. The team meticulously documented the scene, photographing every detail from the neatly kept bed to the half-drunk cup of coffee on the nightstand. They collected potential evidence, including Dr. Cameron immediately requested a full toxicology report to pinpoint the substance responsible for Ethan's sudden demise. The investigation widened as police questioned Alex Reed, Ethan's roommate, who, though still in shock, provided full cooperation. Alex recounted Ethan's recent activities, highlighting his excitement
and Sophia had spent the morning at the restaurant, finalizing preparations for a big dinner service. David had left early, mumbling something about running errands and meeting a friend for coffee. As Sophia drove home, her mind filled with last-minute thoughts about the evening's menu, she decided on a whim to stop by her mother's bookstore for a quick chat. Perhaps a cup of tea and a familiar face would soothe her anxious mind. But as she turned onto the quiet street leading to Maggie's shop, her heart froze. There, tucked away behind the bookstore, was David's car. For a moment, Sophia sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to convince herself there was an innocent reason for his presence. But deep down, she already knew the truth. With trembling legs, Sophia approached her mother's bookstore. The curtains were mostly drawn, but through a small gap, she could see movement inside. Steeling herself with a deep breath, she quietly unlocked the door with her spare key and pushed it open as silently as she could. The scene that met her eyes would be etched in her mind forever. On a cozy, well-worn leather couch, David and Maggie were locked in an intimate embrace, completely unaware of the world outside. Maggie's usually tidy hair was tousled, and David's shirt was partly unbuttoned. On the small coffee table, 2 half-empty cups of tea stood as silent witnesses to their betrayal. For a moment, Sophia felt time stop. Then, as if sensing her presence, David and Maggie looked up, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and something close to defiance. What followed was a whirlwind of emotions and accusation. Sophia's anguished cry shattered the silence, jolting the guilty pair out of their daze. David stumbled to his feet, stammering out half-formed excuses and pleas. Maggie stayed seated, her face drained of color, tears streaking down her cheeks. Sophia, her voice raw with pain and fury, hurled question after question at them. When they finally spoke, the truth cut like a knife. 6 months. It had started as innocent conversations, then slowly turned into something more. They claimed they never intended for it to go this far. They said they were sorry, but Sophia couldn't bear to hear another word. She fled the bookstore, got into her car, and drove aimlessly for hours, the devastating scene replaying in her mind over and over. By the time she returned home, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long, haunting shadows across the lawn of the house she once thought was her safe haven. As she sat alone in the darkened living room, surrounded by the remnants of her once perfect life, something inside her shattered. The pain, the betrayal, the sheer weight of it all. In that darkness, a cold resolve took shape. Someone had to pay for this betrayal, and Sophia knew exactly who it would be. The events that led to the final confrontation unfolded over the course of several tense hours on that warm summer evening. Sophia, having spent the day drowning in grief and fury, found herself pacing the hallways of her home like a restless spirit. The ticking clock in the living room seemed to taunt her, marking the minutes until everything in her world would change forever. As twilight settled, David returned home. His usual confident stride was replaced with hesitant steps, as though he knew what awaited him. Sophia watched him from the shadows as he hung up his jacket and loosened his tie, the familiar routine now stained by the knowledge of his betrayal. David called out her name, his voice tinged with anxiety. When she finally stepped into view, he visibly recoiled. The woman standing before him was nothing like the vibrant, loving wife he had once known. Sophia's eyes were bloodshot and hollow, her posture stiff with barely suppressed rage. David, his face twisted with guilt and desperation, launched into a flurry of excuses and apologies. He talked about feeling neglected, about the stress of work and the weight of their struggles. He insisted that the affair was a mistake, a lapse in judgment that spiraled out of control. But with every word he spoke, Sophia's anger grew, a storm of rage building within her. Before she knew what she was doing, Sophia found herself walking to David's study. She knew he kept a heavy decorative bookend there, an ornate piece he had picked up from a local shop. In a daze, she grabbed it, feeling its cold weight in her hands. When she returned to the living room, David's eyes widened in fear. He raised his hands, backing away slowly, his voice rising in panic as he promised to end the affair, to go to counseling, to do anything to save their marriage. But Sophia barely registered his word. All she could see was the image of David and Maggie, locked in that embrace, playing in an endless loop in her mind. What happened next was a blur of movement and chaos. David took a step forward, perhaps intending to stop her, But in the rush of heightened emotions, Sophia swung the heavy decorative bookend in her hand. The sickening thud as it connected with David's shoulder echoed through the room, followed by the sound of shattering glass as a framed photo fell from a nearby shelf. David stumbled backward, a look of shock and pain etched on his face. He clutched his shoulder where the impact had left a deep bruise, his white shirt now smeared with blood from a cut caused by the broken glass. Gasping for breath, David's eyes locked onto Sophia's, silently pleading for the woman he once knew. As the reality of what she had done set in, Sophia dropped the bookend. It hit the floor with a dull thud, snapping her out of her trance. Her fury melted away, replaced by sheer horror and regret. She rushed to David's side, her hands shaking as she tried to assess the wound she had inflicted. His breathing was labored, his face drained of color. Fighting back tears, Sophia fumbled for her phone and dialed the emergency number, her voice cracking as she gave the dispatcher the address, begging for an ambulance. While she waited for help, Sophia cradled David's head in her lap, murmuring a desperate mix of apologies and pleas for him to stay with her. The next few minutes felt like an eternity. Neighbors, having heard the commotion, began gathering outside. Through the window, Sophia could see their concerned faces morph into expressions of shock as they realized what had happened. She overheard muffled conversations, someone mentioning the police. When the paramedics finally arrived, they moved swiftly to stabilize David. Sophia stood back, numb with disbelief, as they lifted him onto a stretcher and hurried him to the waiting ambulance. The wail of the sirens gradually faded, leaving her standing alone in the silent, tension-filled house, surrounded by the aftermath of her actions. It wasn't long before the police arrived. Detective Carla Reyes took charge of the scene, her sharp eyes scanning every detail as officers cordoned off the area and began collecting evidence. Approaching Sophia, who sat motionless on the stained couch, Detective Reyes spoke in a calm but firm voice, informing Sophia of her rights and asking if she understood what had just occurred. With a voice barely above a whisper, Sophia recounted the day's events, the devastating discovery of the affair, the confrontation, and the moment everything spiraled out of control. Her words were detached, as though she were recounting a story that had happened to someone else. As Sophia was led away and handcuffed, the enormity of the situation began to sink in. She caught glimpses of neighbors peering out from behind curtains, their faces a mix of fear and curiosity. At the local hospital, David lay in critical condition, his injury far worse than it initially seemed. The blow had caused significant internal damage, and as he underwent surgery after surgery, friends and colleagues gathered in the waiting room, their whispered conversations filled with shock and speculation. Maggie, overcome with guilt and shame, tried to visit David, but was turned away by the hospital staff at his request. She retreated to her apartment above the bookstore, where she isolated herself, refusing to answer calls or see anyone. The weight of what she had caused left her looking years older, her once lively eyes now hollow and filled with sorrow. Detective Reyes dug deeper into the events that led up to that fateful night. She interviewed friends, colleagues, and family members, piecing together the tangled web of relationships and secrets that had unraveled so violently. The more she learned about the Chambers family's strained history and the affair between David and Maggie, the more complicated the case became. As the investigation moved forward, the town of Seabrook found itself divided. What initially seemed like a straightforward case of assault in a fit of rage was now viewed as a tragic consequence of betrayal and broken trust. Some residents felt sympathy for Sophia's situation, while others condemned her actions as unforgivable, no matter the circumstances. One of the most crucial pieces of evidence came from an unexpected source. Sophia's close friend and fellow chef, Lisa, stepped forward with a series of text messages. In the weeks leading up to the confrontation, Sophia had confided in Lisa about her growing suspicions, sharing the signs of infidelity she had noticed. The messages revealed Sophia's emotional turmoil and her struggle to accept the truth, providing valuable insight into her mental state leading up to the incident. Inside the packed courtroom, tension hung in the air as the judge called the proceedings to order. The prosecution, led by the ambitious District Attorney Vincent Harding, portrayed Sophia as a vengeful woman who had committed a premeditated act of violence. Harding argued that the assault was not a crime of passion, but a calculated attempt to punish both her husband and her mother for their betrayal. Sophia's defense attorney, Carla Morales, presented a different narrative. She painted Sophia as a victim of unbearable circumstances, a woman pushed to the edge by a betrayal that shattered her world. Morales emphasized Sophia's impeccable reputation, her dedication to her community, and the extreme emotional distress she had been under when she lashed out. In their closing statements, both sides made passionate appeals to the jury. Harding focused on the severity of the crime and the need for justice, while Morales urged the jury to consider the extraordinary situation and Sophia's otherwise exemplary life. As the jury left to deliberate, a hush fell over the courtroom. The fate of Sophia Reynolds now rested in their hands, and with it, the resolution of a tragedy that had rocked the quiet town of Seabrook. After 3 days of intense deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. They found Sophia Reynolds guilty of aggravated assault, a lesser charge than the attempted murder the prosecution sought. The courtroom buzzed with a mix of gasps and murmurs as the verdict was read, with Sophia standing quietly beside her attorney. The judge, considering Sophia's unblemished record and the extraordinary circumstances of the case, sentenced her to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 years. Additionally, Sophia was required to undergo psychological counseling and complete an anger management program. The sentence drew mixed reactions. Some believed it was too lenient given the harm caused, while others felt it was a fair balance of justice and empathy. As Sophia was led away from the courtroom, the gravity of her actions and the long road ahead seemed to settle on her shoulder. David, having recovered from his injuries but forever changed by the experience, moved to a different state to start fresh. He and Sophia divorced during her incarceration, their communication limited to formal letters and rare phone calls. Despite the hurt and pain, there was a fragile sense of forgiveness between them, born of mutual understanding and regret. Maggie retreated from public life entirely. She lived in near isolation, only occasionally visited by a health aide. The burden of her role in the tragedy drained her vitality, leaving her a shadow of her former self. As Seabrook slowly healed and life moved forward, the story of Sophia, David, and Maggie became a sobering reminder of how quickly and irreversibly lives can unravel. It compels us to examine our own relationships, to value the trust we share with loved ones, and to reflect on the lasting consequences of the choices we make.
Today, we delve into the tranquil surroundings of Monterey, California, a locale renowned for its breathtaking coastal views and rich cultural history. The community was shaken to its core when the body of a 21-year-old was discovered under troubling and mysterious circumstances. This is the story of a young groom, a 58-year-old wealthy art collector, and a marriage that ended in tragedy. Jack Thompson was a 21-year-old with a quiet disposition, born and raised in the picturesque town of Carmel by the Sea, just outside Monterey. Jack had recently completed his training as a chef in May 2022, known among his peers as the reserved one who was always experimenting with new recipes. While his friends were advancing in their culinary careers, Jack was still unsure of his path in the culinary world. He dreamed of one day owning his own restaurant, but he was uncertain about how to make his dreams a reality. Jack lived with his mother, Martha Thompson, in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Their financial situation was dire. Martha, a single mother, had struggled to keep them afloat, especially after a series of business failures left them in debt. The weight of their financial troubles bore heavily on Jack, who felt a strong obligation to support his mother. Despite his introverted nature, Jack was deeply compassionate, always willing to help others even as he faced his own challenges. In the week leading up to his untimely death, Jack found himself in an extraordinary situation. He had unexpectedly married Veronica Steele, a 58-year-old renowned art collector, known for her lavish lifestyle and multiple previous marriages. Veronica insisted on an extravagant wedding held at a stunning cliffside estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur. The event was opulent, with luxurious decorations, a gourmet menu, and a custom-made designer gown for Veronica. However, Jack appeared uncomfortable throughout the celebration. He looked anxious and unsure about the drastic turn his life had taken. The sudden announcement of his marriage to the much older Veronica Steele shocked everyone who knew him. Many speculated that his decision was influenced by his mother's financial difficulties, while others feared he might be under undue pressure. Jack's relationship with Veronica was strained not only by their significant age difference, but also by Veronica's controlling personality. She was notorious for her temper tantrums when things didn't go her way, leaving Jack increasingly overwhelmed by her behavior. He confided his worries and fears to his mother, but Martha urged him to stay in the marriage, believing it could secure their financial future. As a result, Jack felt trapped, caught between his mother's expectations and his growing discomfort with his new life. At the time of his death, Jack was still struggling to adjust to his changed circumstance. He had withdrawn from his friends and spent most of his time in the luxurious home he now shared with Veronica. His dream of becoming a successful chef seemed more out of reach than ever. He was a young man who had lost his direction, struggling to imagine a future that felt truly his own. On the morning of August 8, 2022, the peaceful atmosphere of Monterey was shattered by a disturbing discovery. At 8:30 a.m., Doris Miller, a 78-year-old neighbor, was on her regular morning walk when she noticed something strange at the cliffside estate of Veronica Steele Thompson. The curtains were tightly drawn, and the front door was slightly ajar. Doris, who had cherished the tranquility of the neighborhood for over 3 decades, found this unusual, especially since Veronica was known for her meticulous habits and always kept everything in perfect order. Driven by curiosity and concern, Doris decided to investigate. As she approached the house, she called out but received no reply. Hesitantly, she stepped inside and was immediately hit by a strong, acrid odor. It was then that she discovered Jack Thompson lying motionless on the living room floor. His body was slumped over the sofa, surrounded by several empty prescription bottles. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table beside him. Doris stood frozen, her heart pounding. She knew Jack and could barely comprehend the scene in front of her. As tears welled up in her eyes, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she gave the address and described the grim scene. When the 911 operator asked her to check for signs of life, Doris hesitated but then cautiously approached Jack. She knelt beside him and gently shook his shoulder, calling his name. There was no response. His skin was pale, his lips faintly blue, and there were no signs of breathing. Doris's mind raced back to the wedding just a week earlier, where Jack had looked so out of place next to the much older Veronica in her extravagant bridal gown. She struggled to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. With tears streaming down her face, Doris stayed on the line with the 911 operator until the police and paramedics arrived. The authorities soon confirmed Jack's death at the scene. Doris, shaken and heartbroken, was escorted outside, where she sat on the curb, staring blankly at the estate where Jack's promising life had met a tragic end. The police arrived at the Steele Thompson residence just before 9 a.m. on August 8, 2022. The investigation was led by Detective Michael Harris, a seasoned detective with the Monterey Police Department, known for his sharp intuition and straightforward approach. Detective Harris wasted no time in examining the scene. Accompanied by Officer Mark Davis, an eager young officer, they entered the home that had now become the center of a tragic mystery. The living room, where Jack's body was discovered, was eerily quiet. The elegant furniture and sophisticated decor stood in stark contrast to the lifeless figure on the floor. Detective Harris immediately noticed the scattered empty pill bottles and the glass of water on the coffee table. He examined the labels, prescriptions for medications like Xanax and OxyContin, drugs commonly associated with overdose cases. The scene was unervingly orderly. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. The extreme tidiness suggested that whatever had happened wasn't a chaotic, spur-of-the-moment event, but something much more deliberate. Detective Harris instructed Officer Davis to begin photographing the scene, while he called in a forensics team to dust for fingerprints and gather evidence. The medical examiner, Dr. Evelyn Hahn, arrived shortly thereafter to examine the body. She confirmed that Jack had likely died from an overdose, but the amount of drugs present, far above therapeutic levels, indicated that it wasn't accidental. As they dug deeper into the investigation, Detective Harris's attention was drawn to a small but telling detail: a wedding photograph of Jack and Veronica on the mantel. In the photo, Jack's expression was subdued, his eyes downcast, a stark contrast to Veronica's bright, confident smile. This subtle detail suggested that everything was not as harmonious in this newly united household as it appeared. The forensic team meticulously collected the pill bottles, the glass of water, and any other pertinent evidence. They also detected a faint scent of perfume in the air, which Detective Harris recognized as Veronica's signature fragrance, a high-end scent from Chanel No. 5. By the time the initial examination was complete, Detective Harris was increasingly convinced that this case was more than just an overdose. The evidence pointed to foul play, and the investigation was just beginning. As they delved further into Jack Thompson's death, suspicion naturally fell on the most likely suspect, Veronica Steele Thompson, Jack's 58-year-old wife. Veronica was a well-known figure in Monterey, famous for her lavish lifestyle and domineering personality. Coming from a wealthy background, Veronica had been through multiple marriages, each ending in bitterness. Known for her obsession with preserving her youth and her tendency to lash out when things didn't go her way, Veronica's demanding nature had earned her a reputation for perfectionism. When Detective Harris and Officer Davis visited Veronica's home later that day, they found her lounging nonchalantly by the pool, just yards from where her husband had died, casually sipping a mimosa and flipping through the latest issue of Vogue. Despite the grim circumstances, Veronica appeared disturbingly composed. Dressed in a stylish kaftan and oversized sunglasses, she exuded a detached air that immediately caught Detective Harris's attention. Veronica greeted the officers with a superficial smile that didn't reach her eyes. When questioned about the events leading up to Jack's death, she explained that she had gone to bed early the previous night, leaving Jack in the living room to work on some new recipes. She assumed he had fallen asleep on the couch when she didn't find him in their bed the next morning. Upon hearing of his death, her reaction was muted, showing only a mild expression of sorrow, as if she had learned of a distant acquaintance's passing. During the interrogation, Veronica's story remained consistent, but her emotional detachment raised suspicions. She cooperated with the investigators but kept a certain distance, responding with practiced precision. When asked about the medications found at the scene, Veronica mentioned that Jack had been struggling recently and had prescriptions to help with his mental well-being. She claimed to be unaware of any potential for overdose, suggesting that perhaps Jack had taken more pills than intended in a moment of despair. Despite her composed facade, Detective Harris noted several inconsistencies in Veronica's account. For instance, Veronica had claimed that Jack was working on his recipes, yet the TV, which he often used to watch cooking shows for inspiration, was off when Doris Miller found the body. Moreover,
the bed in the master bedroom appeared untouched, suggesting that Veronica may not have gone to bed at all. The more Detective Harris examined her statements, the clearer it became that Veronica was hiding something. However, without concrete evidence, the police couldn't detain her. Veronica's alibi seemed airtight, but her demeanor cast a shadow of doubt. As the interrogation concluded, Detective Harris remained uneasy, suspecting that Veronica, with her elegant and confident exterior, was more deeply involved in Jack's death than she was letting on. With Veronica Steele Thompson still under scrutiny, the focus shifted to a second suspect, Martha Thompson, Jack's mother. Martha, at 49, had faced a lifetime of hardships. Her life was marked by poor choices, each seemingly worse than the last. Overwhelmed by crippling debt, Martha had turned to selling prescription drugs in secret, a fact known to only a few. Detective Harris, aware of Martha's past arrests, considered how her dire financial situation might have driven her to push Jack into his ill-fated marriage with Veronica. The union promised financial salvation, too tempting for Martha to ignore. When brought in for questioning, Martha appeared disheveled and anxious. Dressed in faded jeans and a worn t-shirt, she was a stark contrast to Veronica's polished appearance. Martha's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, a habit she had recently picked up again, and her voice quivered as she answered questions. She admitted to encouraging Jack's marriage to Veronica, describing it as an opportunity too good to pass up. She recalled the wedding at the Grand Big Sur estate, where Jack had looked distinctly uncomfortable amidst the extravagance. Martha insisted she only wanted what was best for her son, that Veronica could provide the financial stability she had failed to achieve herself. However, when the conversation turned to the medications found at the scene, Martha became defensive. She denied any knowledge of the large quantity of pills, claiming that Jack must have obtained them on his own. Yet Detective Harris wasn't convinced. Martha's financial troubles, her illegal drug activities, and her desperation to secure a better future all pointed to her involvement. During the interrogation, Martha's responses grew increasingly inconsistent. She initially claimed she hadn't seen Jack for days, but later contradicted herself by saying she had visited him the night before his death. Her agitation and conflicting statements only deepened the police's suspicion. Despite her denials, Martha's connection to the drugs and her apparent motive to maintain Jack's marriage positioned her as a key suspect. Detective Harris knew that Martha was resourceful, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to protect herself, even if it meant putting her own son at risk. As the interrogation concluded, they were getting closer to the truth, but there were still missing pieces to the puzzle. With both Veronica Steele Thompson and Martha Thompson under investigation, attention turned to a third suspect, Harold Monroe, Veronica's ex-husband. At 70 years old, Harold was a successful real estate mogul known for his ruthless tactics in both business and personal matters. His latest venture involved launching a series of luxury developments along the California coast, a project that had significantly bolstered his financial standing. Harold's marriage to Veronica had ended bitterly just months before she married Jack, and their divorce had become a hot topic in local social circles. Veronica had walked away with a substantial portion of Harold's wealth, which had deeply humiliated and angered him. Jack's sudden marriage to Veronica, a much younger man she had recently met, felt like a direct insult. Harold's lingering resentment and envy made him a key suspect in the ongoing investigation. Detective Harris and Officer Davis decided to question Harold. When they arrived at his sprawling estate, they found him in his study, surrounded by blueprints and real estate contracts. Harold greeted them with a firm handshake, exuding an air of calm and confidence. Unlike Martha, who had appeared nervous and unsettled, Harold was composed and seemed almost prepared for their questions. During the interrogation, Harold was cooperative but carefully measured in his response. He admitted his frustration over Veronica's remarriage, describing it as a deep betrayal. However, he denied any involvement in Jack's death. Harold explained that he had been focused on his business ventures and had kept minimal contact with Veronica or Jack since the divorce. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Jack's death, Harold provided a strong alibi. He had been attending a real estate gala in San Francisco, with numerous prominent individuals able to vouch for his presence, making it difficult for the police to challenge his alibi. Despite his cooperative demeanor, Detective Harris remained suspicious. Harold's overly composed calm felt almost rehearsed, as if he had anticipated their line of questioning. His recent heated exchange with Veronica, witnessed during a high-profile charity event where Harold had ominously warned her that she would regret their divorce, only deepened their suspicions. Although there wasn't enough evidence to detain Harold, his potential motives of jealousy and revenge kept him firmly in the investigative spotlight. The investigation was far from over, and Detective Harris realized they needed to dig deeper to uncover the full truth. On August 15, 2022, just as the case seemed to be hitting a dead end, a crucial new piece of evidence surfaced. It was a mild, sunny afternoon, with clouds beginning to gather over Monterey. Detective Michael Harris was at the station reviewing the case files when Officer Mark Davis rushed in, holding a sealed envelope. It had arrived anonymously at the station that morning, immediately raising suspicion. Inside the envelope was a USB drive. The contents of the drive were shocking. A series of text messages between Veronica Steele Thompson and an unidentified contact, dated just days before Jack's death. The messages outlined Veronica's plan to divorce Jack and disinherit him, using her knowledge of Martha Thompson's illegal drug activities as leverage. The messages revealed Veronica's dissatisfaction with Jack's subdued personality and his lackluster efforts in the kitchen as her spouse, along with her growing eagerness to free herself from the marriage. "His cooking is so uninspired," one message read. "His plating skills are worse than a novice's," another harsh text declared. "If that bleep Martha thinks she can control this bleep, she's gravely mistaken. I'll make sure she and that mediocre bleep chef pay." These texts provided deep insight into Veronica's mindset and intentions. It became clear that she was scheming to rid herself of both Jack and Martha. The messages also hinted at the involvement of a third party, a private investigator Veronica had hired to dig up dirt on Martha's involvement in the illegal drug trade. This investigator had uncovered Martha's history of drug trafficking and was feeding Veronica the information she needed to execute her plan. This revelation painted Veronica as a calculating and vindictive individual, determined to achieve her goals by any means necessary. It also raised significant questions about Martha's role in Jack's death? Was Martha aware of Veronica's plot and acted out of desperation? Or was she merely an unwitting pawn in Veronica's elaborate scheme? Armed with this compelling evidence, the police ramped up their investigation into both Veronica and Martha. The case gained renewed momentum as it became evident that the truth was more complex than initially thought. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the full story was still unfolding. On August 20th, 2022, as the investigation reached a critical point, Detective Michael Harris received a breakthrough after analyzing the text messages found on the USB drive and cross-referencing them with phone records. It became clear that Martha Thompson, Jack's own mother, was behind the deadly scheme. Driven by desperation and greed, Martha had used her son as a pawn in her plot. The police now had enough evidence to arrest her. Martha Thompson, 49, was a woman who saw life as a relentless struggle, burdened by debt and haunted by poor decisions. Martha viewed Jack's marriage to Veronica as her ticket out of financial ruin. She feared that Jack, who had shown little interest in women before, would leave Veronica, shattering Martha's hopes for a steady stream of money. To ensure that wouldn't happen, Martha had been secretly giving Jack prescription drugs and sexual enhancers to keep him compliant and performing, but her plan went terribly wrong when Jack accidentally overdosed, taking far more than she had intended. The twist came when it was revealed that Veronica, unsatisfied with Jack's lack of enthusiasm as a husband, had been planning to divorce him and cut both him and Martha out of her life. She had discovered Martha's drug dealings and intended to use that information to keep them out of her money. But Martha, desperate to keep the marriage intact, took matters into her own hands on the night of Jack's death. Martha had given him a stronger dose of the drugs, hoping to calm him down. But Jack, distraught over his loveless marriage and fearful of Veronica's harshness, took even more pills on his own, leading to a fatal overdose. Martha hadn't meant to kill her son, but her actions directly caused his death. When the police confronted Martha with the evidence, she initially denied everything. Her demeanor was panicked and frantic, a stark contrast to her earlier calm. But as Detective Harris laid out the incriminating messages and phone records, Martha's defenses crumbled. She claimed she never intended to kill her son, only to keep him in the marriage until they could secure their financial future. Martha's arrest sent shockwaves through the small community of Monterey. Jack's family was devastated by the revelation that his own mother had caused his death. The community, already shaken by the bizarre circumstances of the marriage, now had to come to terms with the tragic reality that greed and desperation had led to such a senseless loss. As Martha was led away in handcuffs, she appeared numb, unable to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. The community, overwhelmed by grief, expressed their sorrow and disbelief, struggling to accept what had happened. The arrest marked the end of a dark chapter in Monterey's history, but the pain and shock would linger for a long time. Martha Thompson's trial began in early December 2022. The courtroom was packed with reporters from outlets like the Monterey Gazette and True Crime Daily, eager to cover the shocking details of the case. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Christensen, portrayed Martha as a manipulative and desperate woman who had prioritized her financial needs over her son's life. Christensen, known for his sharp intellect and relentless pursuit of justice, argued that Martha's actions were premeditated and driven by greed. He pointed to the text messages, phone records, and Martha's own confession as undeniable proof of her guilt. The defense, led by public defender Carita Vasquez, countered by portraying Martha as a troubled mother who had made a terrible mistake. Vasquez, a seasoned attorney known for her compassion, argued that Martha never intended to kill Jack. She emphasized Martha's financial struggles, her desperation to secure a better future for her family, and the fact that Jack's death was accidental. Vasquez appealed to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider Martha's difficult circumstances and the pressure she was under. Throughout the trial, Jack's family watched in agony. Martha's actions had torn their family apart, and the pain was clear in their tearful expressions. The prosecution's case was strong, but the defense's argument for leniency resonated with some jurors. On December 15, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. Martha Thompson was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The jury believed that while Martha's actions had led to Jack's death, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that she had intended to kill him. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, with Martha showing little reaction, her face pale and expressionless. The judge sentenced Martha to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient, given the tragic loss of Jack's life, while others believed it was fair considering Martha's desperate circumstances. For Jack's family, the verdict brought little comfort. They were left to grapple with the reality that their loved one was gone, taken by the very person who was supposed to protect him. The town of Monterey, too, was left to process the disturbing events that had unfolded in their midst, a stark reminder of how greed and desperation can lead to unthinkable actions. In the months following Martha Thompson's sentencing, the impact of the case continued to resonate deeply within the Monterey community. The trial had left a lasting mark on everyone involved, from the Thompson family to local residents. Martha Thompson was sent to the California State Prison Complex in Sacramento, a high-security facility located near the capital. In prison, Martha faced a challenging environment. Her case had received significant media attention, and she was often the subject of gossip and judgment from fellow inmates. The prison system offered her limited opportunities for rehabilitation and support, leaving her to reflect on the tragic consequences of her actions. Martha spent her time participating in prison programs aimed at addressing substance abuse and mental health issues, hoping to find some sense of redemption and prepare for her eventual release. Despite the turmoil, life in Monterey gradually returned to normal. The town held a memorial for Jack at a local park, attended by friends, family, and residents who wished to honor his memory. The event featured live music and speeches celebrating Jack's life and dreams. It was a somber reminder of the young man whose life was cut short, and it offered the community a chance to come together and support one another. As for the media coverage of the case, it eventually faded, making way for new stories and developments. However, the impact of Jack's death and the subsequent trial continued to serve as a poignant reminder of the consequences of desperation and greed, affecting everyone who had been touched by the tragic events of August 2022. At the heart of the story are 3 lives destined to intertwine. Daniel, a 22-year-old photographer whose charm is both captivating and dangerous. Eleanor Bennett, an architect longing for a deeper connection. And Clara Matthews, a recent widow striving to regain her confidence. Their intertwined fates lead to an unexpected act of violence that reshapes their peaceful coastal town, forcing everyone to reevaluate their understanding of their neighbors. Daniel, at 22, carried himself with a maturity beyond his years. His striking 6-foot frame and easy smile turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks that made him stand out. Daniel had a charisma that made everyone feel uniquely seen. Raised by a retired Army officer, Daniel learned independence early, picking up the discipline and observational skills that made him an exceptional photographer. He could capture moments that others might miss, which quickly made him popular in Willowbrook, where he had set up his own small photography studio. After completing high school, Daniel moved to Willowbrook, seeking both inspiration and independence. His father's old friend offered him a place to stay, giving him the freedom to explore his artistic ambitions without the pressure of immediate success. The locals quickly took notice of the new arrival. People of all ages found reasons to interact with him, drawn to his engaging personality and infectious enthusiasm. It was his neighbors, however, who would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Living on one side was Eleanor Bennett, whose life seemed perfect from the outside: successful career, beautiful home, and a respected husband. On the other side was Clara Matthews, a woman in her mid-40s, trying to rebuild her life after a devastating loss. Daniel's first significant encounter in Willowbrook occurred on a sunny morning, as he was capturing shots of the town's picturesque community garden. Eleanor Bennett approached, offering him a cup of freshly brewed coffee as a welcoming gesture. Their connection was instant, marking the beginning of a transformative journey for both. Eleanor appeared to lead an enviable life: a successful architect, a stunning home, and admiration from her peers. Yet, behind the polished exterior, her life was far from perfect. Married to Martin, a real estate developer whose career often kept him away, Eleanor felt their emotional connection fading after 15 years of marriage. Once full of dreams and creative energy, particularly in her writing,
Eleanor now found her passion sidelined, her unfinished manuscripts gathering dust as her husband's career took precedence. The moment Eleanor met Daniel, an old spark was reignited. His fresh outlook and genuine interest in her stories rekindled her spirit. She found herself gravitating toward his studio whenever she could, her days brightened by each interaction. What began as casual conversations about art and architecture soon delved deeper. Daniel's enthusiasm for her writing reignited Eleanor's long-dormant passion, leading her back to the manuscripts that had once been her creative refuge. One evening, as Martin was tied up with yet another late meeting, Eleanor invited Daniel over to share some of her old manuscripts. In the quiet of her home office, surrounded by stacks of paper filled with the stories of her abandoned dreams, a palpable shift occurred. Daniel's hand brushed against hers as they flipped through the pages, sending a jolt of emotion through Eleanor. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. Daniel's gaze was curious, stirring feelings that had long been buried. Years of emotional neglect had led to this moment, a desperate yearning for genuine connection. Eleanor leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that was transformative. As she pulled back, the intensity of her emotions left her breathless and conflicted, but the spark Daniel had ignited was too powerful to ignore. Clara Matthews, at 45, was forging a new path. After the unexpected death of her husband, she had summoned the courage to reshape her solitary life. The loss had become final just a few months before Daniel moved in next door, leaving Clara emotionally vulnerable. Once vibrant and confident, prolonged grief had eroded her self-esteem. She doubted even the simplest decisions, from what to wear to how to manage her yoga studio. The tragedy had strained her finances and spirit, forcing her to move from the grandeur of her former home to a modest cottage in Willowbrook. Clara's initial meeting with Daniel took place on a blustery afternoon as she struggled with groceries outside her house. Without hesitation, Daniel stepped in to help, his warm smile giving her a sense of visibility she hadn't felt in years. As they put away the groceries, Clara found herself sharing details of her recent hardships, exchange stories, and share laughter that felt both invigorating and forbidden. The bustling setting offered the perfect camouflage, enabling them to merge with other patrons without attracting notice. However, the happiness these moments brought her was tinged with guilt. Sophie, ever perceptive to the moods around her, started sensing that something was amiss. Though she couldn't pinpoint what it was, a sense of disquiet troubled her. Isabel's demeanor had shifted. Her smile seemed contrived, and she often seemed preoccupied during family meals. Occasionally, Isabel would excuse herself to answer phone calls, returning with an anxious expression. Sophie couldn't shake the feeling that her mother was concealing something, yet she lacked the experience in adult relationships to address it. Meanwhile, Michael remained oblivious to the mounting tension within his family. He stayed committed to his work, convinced that his provision was vital for their happiness. He often returned home drained, seeking comfort in the regularity of household life. His conversations with Isabel had shortened to concise and functional exchanges, which he attributed to her job stress rather than any underlying troubles. Michael frequently attempted to initiate discussions about household projects or future endeavors, but Isabel's aloof and distracted replies only added to his growing sense of frustration and bewilderment. They crafted detailed schemes to dodge any suspicions. Isabel often claimed she had late shifts at the police department or needed to stay for overtime, while Ethan would explain he was prepping for exams or putting in extra hours at the restaurant. Each meeting, veiled in secrecy, not only thrilled them but also intensified Isabel's internal struggle. She was aware she was straying from her commitments, yet the emotional bond with Ethan was overwhelmingly compelling. He made her feel cherished, valuable, and acknowledged, sensations that had become scarce in her life with Michael. One afternoon, while strolling through Portland's Forest Park, Isabel stopped on a hidden path to catch her breath. The air was brisk and the scent of the forest enveloped them. Ethan, vibrant and full of life, enthusiastically shared a tale from his youth. Listening to him, Isabel felt a wave of affection wash over her, shadowed by the stark reality of their situation. She pondered whether this new connection was worth the risks. Despite knowing the precariousness of their liaison, the enchantment of their shared moments was too tempting to forsake. Sophie's doubts kept mounting. She observed her mother intently, trying to decipher the shifts in her demeanor. The connection they once cherished now seemed compromised, and Sophie contemplated whether to address her concerns with Isabel. She thought about broaching the subject several times, but the fear of unsettling revelations deterred her. She hesitated to distress her mother, especially if her suspicions proved baseless. Michael remained blissfully unaware, immersing himself in his work and home responsibilities. Always the guardian and provider, The notion that his wife might be discontented or concealing something never entered his thoughts. For him, life appeared normal. Although he recognized an emotional distance, he dismissed it as a temporary phase. One afternoon, Sophie returned home early from classes, eager to surprise her mother with her favorite dish. Entering the house, she was met with an eerie quietness. The typical sounds of their family life were missing. No laughter, no sounds of television. After calling out for Isabel and receiving no reply, Sophie felt compelled to check her mother's bedroom. What she discovered there devastated her. Isabel's phone lay on the bed, its screen illuminated, displaying a sequence of text messages that were clearly meant to be private. Sophie's pulse raced as she picked up the phone, her hands shaking with both dread and resolve. She scrolled through the messages, each one confirming her gravest fears. The exchanges between Isabel and Ethan were rife with flirtation, yearning, and plans for future rendezvous. There was evident an emotional affair was underway. The realization made Sophie's heart plummet. Betrayal struck her profoundly, leaving her breathless. The thought that her mother, the woman she had revered, could engage in such deceit was unfathomable. A whirlwind of emotions, anger, sorrow, confusion, surged through her, overwhelming her senses and clouding her judgment. Sophie dropped the phone onto the bed, her mind swirling with turmoil. She felt shattered and betrayed, unable to reconcile the loving mother she had always known with the woman who had been sneaking around behind her back. Her anger surged as she realized her own boyfriend, Ethan, had been part of this betrayal. How could he do this to her? The man she trusted was now involved in her mother's infidelity. Later that evening, when Ethan came over to see Sophie, she didn't hesitate. They were in the living room, the same space where they had shared countless laughs and quiet moments. Now it felt like a battlefield. "Ethan," she said, her voice cold and firm, "we need to talk." Ethan looked confused. "What's wrong, Sophie? You seem upset." "Upset? That's an understatement. I found something today that changes everything." "What do you mean?" His face shifted to concern, but Sophie noticed a flicker of guilt. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I found texts on my mom's phone, texts between you and her. You both knew exactly." While helping Eleanor carry groceries, he narrowly escaped being seen by Clara. He ducked behind a car, pretending to retrieve a dropped item, his heart racing with the near miss. Each close call highlighted the precarious nature of his secret life, leaving him shaken by how easily everything could fall apart. As Eleanor and Clara grew more attached, they began to demand more of Daniel's time and attention. Eleanor, revitalized by her rediscovered passion for writing, started discussing the possibility of leaving her husband. She envisioned a future with Daniel, filled with love and creative collaborations, and painted this dream vividly during their meetings. These conversations left Daniel both excited and terrified, unsure of how to respond to such intense declarations, especially given their age differences. Clara, more cautious about rushing into a new relationship, subtly brought Daniel closer into her life. She introduced him to her friends as the thoughtful young neighbor, but their affectionate exchanges and knowing glances revealed much more. She even hinted at holiday plans, suggesting that Daniel might meet her family during the festive season. The increasing expectations from both women compounded the complexity of Daniel's already precarious situation. He found himself trapped in conflicting commitments, agreeing to holiday engagements with both Eleanor and Clara, fully aware that he would inevitably disappoint one or both of them. As the pressure mounted, the toll on Daniel became evident. He lost weight, endured sleepless nights filled with anxiety, and developed a habit of nervously checking his phone and looking over his shoulder. He knew he needed to end one of the relationships, but was paralyzed by the thought of causing pain to either woman. Unbeknownst to him, his erratic behavior did not go unnoticed. Both Eleanor and Clara, initially blinded by their emotions, began to sense that something was wrong. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the fragile balance Daniel had struggled to maintain. The carefully constructed facade Daniel had upheld unraveled dramatically on a crisp autumn evening at Willowbrook's annual festival. With the town square bustling with festivities, Daniel hesitated about attending, knowing that both Eleanor and Clara would be there. Ultimately, he decided that not showing up would arouse more suspicion than being present. As he mingled among the townspeople, he felt as though he were navigating a minefield, exchanging pleasantries while anxiously scanning the crowd for signs of Eleanor or Clara. Just as he began to relax, thinking he might avoid any drama, fate intervened. Eleanor, who was assisting at the bookstall, caught sight of Daniel and beckoned him over with a bright smile. As he approached, hesitantly, He noticed Clara at a nearby booth, arranging items for an art auction. Time seemed to slow as Daniel watched both women, unaware of each other's significance in his life, drawing closer to an unavoidable confrontation. Eleanor reached him first, her embrace lingering longer than a simple neighborly gesture. As she stepped back, her eyes glowing with affection, Clara joined them. Daniel's heart sank as he saw the puzzled and slowly dawning realization on their faces. A tense silence enveloped the trio, broken only when Eleanor, ever the gracious architect, extended her hand to Clara. Introducing herself, Clara responded in kind, her gaze shifting between Daniel and Eleanor, noticing the too familiar touch that lingered on Daniel's arm. The ensuing conversation became an intricate dance of innuendo and subtle implication. Both women, drawing on their instincts and the hints they had previously overlooked, began to piece together the reality of their shared connection with Daniel. Caught in the middle, Daniel was paralyzed, unable to offer any defense. His silence only deepened the growing suspicions of both women, sealing the fate of his double life. The tension reached its breaking point when Eleanor, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, pointed out a distinctive manuscript she had written specifically for Daniel, a story he had carelessly left behind. In that moment, the full extent of Daniel's deceit was exposed to both women. Eleanor's face crumpled, tears welling up, while Clara's expression hardened into one of icy indignation. Without a word, they both turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone, the weight of his actions crashing down around him. The repercussions were swift and brutal. As Eleanor and Clara departed in opposite directions, whispers spread among the festival goers. Onlookers who had witnessed their charged confrontation began to speculate, and soon rumors rippled through Willowbrook. Daniel, reeling from the sudden exposure of his deceit, fled the event. That night, he paced restlessly, alternating between frantic attempts to contact both women to Ethan's grieving family.
Tried to portray Isabella Ruiz as a frail old woman who could not possibly have orchestrated such a crime. Randall painted Lina Castillo as the true mastermind, claiming that Isabella had been manipulated into covering up for her daughter-in-law. However, Isabella's stern demeanor on the stand did little to win the jury's sympathy, and they were clearly disturbed by the sordid details of the case. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Isabella Ruiz was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lina Castillo, though charged as an accessory to murder, received a lighter sentence of 25 years after cooperating with investigators. The verdict brought some relief to Victor's family, but the damage left behind by the shocking betrayal would never fully heal. Many felt that justice had been served, but Victor's tragic death and the circumstances surrounding it left a dark cloud over the Ruiz family for years to come. After the trial, life changed drastically for everyone involved. Isabella Ruiz, the mother convicted of murdering her son, was sent to a state prison in California. Despite her sharp wit and strong personality, life behind bars proved challenging. Isabella tried to maintain her dignity, but the isolation and stigma of her crime weighed heavily on her. In prison, she was often the target of gossip and disdain from other inmates. Over the years, Isabella's health began to decline, and in 2021 she contracted COVID-19 during a surge in cases. Despite efforts to treat her, she passed away alone in a prison hospital. News of her death made headlines, with some former friends and family expressing mixed feelings about her fate. Lina Castillo, Victor's widow, faced a different kind of consequence after her reduced sentence of 25 years. She served her time in a women's correctional facility, often reminiscing about her life before the murder. During her incarceration, she sought therapy to deal with her feelings of guilt and confusion about her relationships. Lina maintained her innocence regarding the actual murder but acknowledged her role in the events that unfolded. Amy Liu, the young yoga instructor who had become entangled in the scandal, also faced her own struggles. Though Amy was never charged with any crime, the fallout from the trial affected her reputation. She continued to work at the resort for a few years after the events, but the whispers of the affair haunted her. In search of a fresh start, Amy eventually moved to Los Angeles, California, where she enrolled in college.
Clara joined them. Daniel's heart sank as he saw the puzzled and slowly dawning realization on their faces. A tense silence enveloped the trio, broken only when Eleanor, ever the gracious architect, extended her hand to Clara. Introducing herself, Clara responded in kind, her gaze shifting between Daniel and Eleanor, noticing the too familiar touch that lingered on Daniel's arm. The ensuing conversation became an intricate dance of innuendo and subtle implication. Both women, drawing on their instincts and the hints they had previously overlooked, began to piece together the reality of their shared connection with Daniel. Caught in the middle, Daniel was paralyzed, unable to offer any defense. His silence only deepened the growing suspicions of both women, sealing the fate of his double life. The tension reached its breaking point when Eleanor, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, pointed out a distinctive manuscript she had written specifically for Daniel, a story he had carelessly left behind. In that moment, the full extent of Daniel's deceit was exposed to both women. Eleanor's face crumpled, tears
He grappled not only with the public scandal of his wife's betrayal, but also the shock of her drastic actions. He withdrew from his public life, taking a leave of absence from his real estate business. The inquiry also highlighted Eleanor's significant emotional turmoil leading up to the incident. Neighbors and acquaintances, who had previously been hesitant to get involved, came forward with observations of her increasingly unstable behavior and mental distress. These accounts became crucial in shaping her legal defense. Clara Matthews's relatives, shocked and grief-stricken, traveled from afar to cope with their loss. The investigation also scrutinized the firearm involved. Legally registered to Martin, the gun had been carelessly stored, raising legal questions about his responsibility in the tragedy, further complicating an already intricate legal case. The trial of Eleanor Bennett began 6 months after the incident. Prosecutors portrayed her as a calculating murderer, driven by jealousy, citing her premeditated retrieval of the firearm and her deteriorating mental state as evidence of her intent. In contrast, the defense argued that Eleanor was a victim of her circumstances, pushed to the brink by emotional betrayal and overwhelming stress. They called upon experts to testify about how prolonged emotional distress could impair judgment. Daniel's testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. His detailed account of the relationships and events leading up to the shooting provided essential context, though his time on the stand was visibly distressing for everyone involved. After extensive testimonies and careful deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Eleanor was found guilty of second-degree murder, a verdict less severe than what the prosecution had sought. The judge, taking into account the unique circumstances and Eleanor's previously clean record, sentenced her to 18 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 12 years. In the years that followed, the residents of Willowbrook struggled to recover from the upheaval. The community, once a symbol of peace and neighborly unity, now bore the scars of the tragedy. The events of that chilling November day remained a somber reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic neighborhoods, deep-seated emotions and turmoil can lead to catastrophic outcomes. In this episode, we explore the case of a newlywed husband who disappeared on his honeymoon. The shocking truth behind his disappearance revealed a web of deception, secret affairs, and ultimately murder. Victor Ruiz was a 45-year-old renowned surgeon living in Santa Cruz, California, known for his dedication to his career and sharp mind. He had built a prestigious reputation in the medical field. Despite his accomplishments, Victor had spent most of his life under the firm control of his mother, Isabella Ruiz. After years of bachelorhood, Victor's life took an unexpected turn when he met Lena Castillo, a 32-year-old fitness trainer from Aspen, Colorado. Victor and Lena met at a high-end gym in Los Angeles, where she worked as a personal trainer and he was a client. Lena's warm smile and energetic personality drew him in, and they quickly struck up a conversation that extended far beyond a typical workout session. Her positive attitude and passion for fitness intrigued him, and soon they were exchanging stories over coffee. What began as casual conversations turned into a deep connection. Over the next few months, their relationship flourished. Victor was charmed by Lena's lively spirit, while Lena admired Victor's calmness and stability. They spent their weekends hiking along the scenic coast of Santa Cruz and exploring local art galleries. Lena even managed to win over Victor's strong-willed mother, Isabella, who surprisingly approved of their relationship despite her usual controlling nature. However, their relationship was far from simple. Lena's need for attention from Victor was obvious, but so was her unusual closeness to Isabella. Friends often remarked on how much time Lena spent with Victor's mother, sometimes giving her more attention than Victor himself. This raised eyebrows, with people wondering if Lena was trying to win over Isabella or if there was something more beneath the surface. Lena often invited Isabella to join them on outings, and the two shared private jokes that occasionally left Victor feeling uneasy. Despite these odd dynamics, Victor believed he had finally found happiness. He proposed to Lena in the spring of 2013, and they swiftly planned a wedding, eager to start their lives together. The couple married just weeks before their honeymoon on Catalina Island, California, where they hoped to unwind and celebrate their new life. But just days into the honeymoon, tragedy struck. Victor's vision of a perfect marriage and a peaceful escape by the ocean came crashing down. He mysteriously vanished from the resort one night, and it wouldn't be long before his body was discovered. For a man who had spent his life in control of his destiny, the final moments of Victor Ruiz's life would be anything but. On June 9, 2013, the sun rose over Catalina Island, a favorite honeymoon destination known for its quiet beaches and tranquil atmosphere. As the day began, Lena Castillo awoke in their hotel suite at the seaside resort, eager to start another day of relaxation with her new husband, Victor. But when she turned to the other side of the bed, she realized he was gone. At first, Lena thought nothing of it. She assumed Victor had gone for an early morning walk or headed to the resort cafe for breakfast. However, as the hours passed with no sign of him, her concerns started to grow. After searching the resort and asking staff if anyone had seen him, Lena finally approached the front desk to report Victor missing. The staff immediately contacted the local authorities, and officers from the Catalina Island Police arrived at the resort around 10:30 a.m. Lena described Victor as a responsible man who had no history of wandering off or making sudden changes to plans. She was certain something had gone wrong. The police began their search by combing through the resort and nearby beaches, trails, and other surrounding areas. As the hours turned into days, their efforts continued, but there was no trace of Victor. By June 12th, the island's mood had shifted from one of relaxation to tension. The search intensified as both the police and local community grew increasingly worried, and Lena's worry turned into despair. Then, on the morning of June 14th, a disturbing discovery was made. A local photographer named Frank Baxter came across the grisly scene while walking along a secluded beach around 6:30 a.m.
Hoping to capture the early light. The area was far from the bustling parts of the island frequented by tourists. As Frank neared the shoreline, something in the water caught his eye. At first, he thought it was debris or a large object tangled in the seaweed, but as he got closer, the truth became clear. It was a body. Horrified, Frank quickly dialed 911, his hands shaking as he described what he had found to the operator. Within minutes, the police were on the scene, sealing off the area from onlookers and tourists. Victor Ruiz's body was found face down in the shallow water, his clothes soaked through, with no immediate signs of struggle. At first glance, it seemed like a tragic accident, possibly a drowning. However, as the investigators examined the scene, they noticed something was off. Faint bruises marked Victor's neck, barely visible but suspicious. His body was bloated, indicating that he had been in the water for several hours, but his shoes remained on, which struck investigators as odd. People don't typically go swimming fully dressed. Victor's body was sent to the county morgue for a detailed examination, but by that time, it was clear this was no ordinary drowning. Something far more sinister had taken place on this quiet island retreat. When the Catalina Island Police Department arrived at the scene of Victor Ruiz's body on June 14, 2013, it was evident to Detective Angela Martinez, a seasoned investigator known for her sharp instincts, that this wouldn't be an easy case. While the initial call hinted at a possible accidental drowning, the scene told a much different story. The area where Victor was found was remote, far from the main tourist spots like Avalon Beach, where honeymooners and families usually gathered. The sand around his body was undisturbed, and there were no signs of a struggle or footprints leading to or from the water. Yet, Victor's body was fully dressed, including his shoes, which struck the investigators as strange. People don't typically go swimming with their shoes on. Detective Martinez crouched next to the body, noticing faint bruises around Victor's neck. They were subtle, almost concealed by the salt water that had soaked his skin, but enough to raise suspicion. Something about the scene seemed staged. Nearby, Officer Jake Reynolds, a young officer new to the department, worked alongside Martinez, carefully documenting the area with photographs and notes. An autopsy was quickly arranged, but the early signs all pointed to foul play. The body's condition, bloated from hours in the water, made it difficult to identify any obvious trauma. However, the bruising, along with Victor's fully dressed state, left little doubt in Detective Martinez's mind that this was no accident. The beach remained eerily silent that morning as the investigation team worked methodically. They set up perimeter tape and combed the shoreline for clues, searching for anything out of place, whether it was clothing, footprints, or personal belongings that could offer clues. Their tools included metal detectors, forensic kits, and even drones to scan the surrounding area from above. Detective Martinez took charge, directing her team to treat the case as a potential homicide. Meanwhile, officers back at the resort questioned staff and guests, asking if anyone had seen or heard anything strange the night before. Hotel security footage was also reviewed to piece together Victor's final movements. As the investigation progressed, it became more and more clear that Victor hadn't simply wandered off for a midnight swim. He had been drugged, dragged to the water, and left to drown, the ocean used as a cover-up for a much darker crime. The first person the police turned to was Lena Castillo, Victor's wife of just a few weeks. Lena, 32, was from Aspen, Colorado, and had met Victor less than a year before their whirlwind wedding. Before marrying Victor, Lena had worked as a fitness trainer at a luxury gym in Los Angeles. On the surface, she seemed like a cheerful, outgoing woman with a passion for health and wellness, but those who knew her well hinted at a more complex side. manipulative, secretive, and always calculated. On the morning of June 14, 2013, just hours after Victor's body was found, Lena was brought in for question. Detectives described her demeanor as calm but distant. She wore a large sun hat and sunglasses, refusing to remove them even during the interview. Lena explained that she had woken up that morning to find her husband missing. Initially, she assumed he had gone for an early morning swim, as he had done a few times since they arrived at the Catalina Island resort. But when the hours went by and Victor didn't return, she became worried and called the police. During the interrogation, Lena's story was straightforward, but her behavior raised eyebrows. She spoke calmly, almost too calmly, about her missing husband as if talking about a stranger. When detectives asked her about their relationship, she described Victor as a good man but was vague when questioned about their intimacy during the honeymoon. Detective Angela Martinez, who led the questioning, noticed Lena's lack of emotion. She wasn't behaving like someone who had just lost her husband, Martinez later noted. There was no real sadness, no tears, just a cold detachment that didn't sit right. As the police dug deeper into Lena's background, more troubling details came to light. She had a history of financial issues, with several maxed-out credit cards and unpaid debts. Investigators also discovered that Lena had formed an unusually close bond with Victor's mother, Isabella Ruiz, who had surprisingly joined them on their honeymoon, a detail that struck many as odd. The police began to suspect that Lena might have had a motive for murder. Victor, a wealthy surgeon, had recently amended his will to make Lena the primary beneficiary. If Victor were out of the picture, Lena stood to inherit a substantial fortune. Despite her calm appearance, the police knew they had to dig deeper to understand Lena's true intentions. The second person of interest in Victor Ruiz's death was Amy Liu, a 21-year-old yoga instructor who worked at the beachfront resort where Victor and Lena were staying. Amy was originally from Los Angeles but had moved to Catalina Island to save money for college, where she planned to study kinesiology. Young and carefree, Amy seemed to have a bright future. At least that's what everyone thought. The police soon uncovered that Amy had been involved in a passionate affair with Lena during the Ruiz honeymoon. Several resort employees reported seeing the two women sneaking away together, often while Victor was either asleep or out for a walk. This wasn't just a casual fling. Investigators described Amy as completely under Lena's spell, admitting to having sex with her numerous times after Victor's disappearance, and even after his body was found. Lena, known for her charming but manipulative nature, had easily pulled Amy into her web of deception. On June 22, 2013, Amy was brought in for questioning. Unlike Lena, Amy was visibly shaken and anxious during the interrogation. She confessed to the affair almost immediately but maintained that she had nothing to do with Victor's death. Amy told police that she and Lena had been seeing each other since the couple's arrival on the island, but she insisted she was unaware of any plan to harm Victor. Detective Angela Martinez noted Amy's emotional state, believing that Amy was scared and confused, but not trying to conceal anything about the affair. To the police, Amy seemed more like a pawn in Lena's game than anything else. Amy recounted how Lena had told her that her marriage to Victor was purely a business arrangement and that while she didn't love Victor, she did love his mother, Isabella Ruiz. Lena had even hinted at running away together to the California coast for endless freedom, but Amy never imagined things would go this far. Naive and caught up in the whirlwind of her first romantic relationship with another woman, Amy struggled to comprehend the reality of the situation. Despite her claims of innocence, the police viewed Amy as a person of interest. They were suspicious of her involvement with Lena and wondered whether she had played a role in a larger plan to get rid of Victor. Amy's alibi was shaky. She claimed she had been working at the yoga studio the night Victor disappeared, but her shifts were irregular, and there were no clear records to confirm her whereabouts during the crucial hour. While Amy insisted she had nothing to do with the murder, her involvement with Lena couldn't be ignored. Investigators dug deeper into the young yoga instructor's life, trying to determine just how deeply she had been pulled into Lena's deadly scheme. The investigation took a shocking turn on June 24, 2013, when new evidence came to light. The day started off sunny and warm, typical for Catalina Island in late June. The investigation had stalled until a hotel receptionist, Natalie Brown, came forward with a startling story. Natalie, who had worked at the resort for years, told police she had overheard something disturbing just days before Victor Ruiz's body was found. On the night of June 10, Natalie was working the night shift when she heard strange noises coming from the Ruiz suite. At first, she assumed it was just the couple, but what she heard next made her stop. She distinctly heard two women's voices, one of them being Lena's, clearly engaged in what sounded like rough sex. But what was more alarming, Victor was still in the room, asleep. Natalie explained that she had hesitated to speak up earlier due to her desire to avoid any complications, especially given her personal situation. However, after learning about Victor's death, she felt she had to come forward. When pressed for more details, Natalie confirmed that the other woman she heard was none other than Victor's elderly mother, Isabella Ruiz. This revelation stunned the investigators. They had already confirmed Lena's infidelity, but the fact that she was involved in a sexual relationship with her own mother-in-law was a twist they hadn't anticipated. It completely changed their understanding of the events leading up to Victor's death. Detective Angela Martinez was the first to piece together the implications of Natalie's account. Suddenly, everything clicked into place, and Martinez considered the possibility that Lena and Isabella were using Victor as a cover for their affair. And when that wasn't enough, they plotted to eliminate him. With this new information, the police revisited the crime scene and started digging deeper into the relationship between Lena and Isabella. It wasn't long before more evidence surfaced. Hotel staff recalled frequently seeing the two women together, often leaving Victor behind to have secret encounters in secluded areas of the resort. Other witnesses came forward, describing the strange dynamic between the newlyweds and Isabella. Investigators now believed that Lena and Isabella had been planning Victor's murder for some time. The discovery of their affair added a new layer to their motive. It became clear that Victor had become a barrier to their twisted relationship, an obstacle that needed to be removed. Armed with this new evidence, the police were one step closer to solving the mystery of Victor Ruiz's death. With the new information provided by the hotel receptionist,
detectives shifted their attention to Isabella Ruiz, Victor's 78-year-old mother. Up until this point, Isabella had been viewed as a grieving, long-widowed mother, but her secret relationship with Lena raised serious doubts about her involvement in her son's murder. Isabella was known in Santa Cruz as a strong-willed, wealthy widow with a commanding personality. Even at her advanced age, she kept a tight grip on her son's life and finances, dictating everything from his social engagements to his diet. She was the type of woman who dressed impeccably in brands like Chanel and Hermes and insisted on driving her black Cadillac. Despite suffering from macular degeneration, she had always expected unwavering loyalty from Victor but had been unusually approving of his marriage to Lena. Detectives invited Isabella Ruiz to the station for a formal interview on June 25, 2013. At first, Isabella appeared calm and composed, playing the role of a heartbroken mother. She expressed disbelief that anyone would suspect her or Lena of wrongdoing. "My son was my precious boy," she said, her voice trembling as she dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief. "I would never harm my darling Victor." But when detectives confronted her with the receptionist's testimony and the growing evidence of her secret affair with Lena, Isabella's demeanor shifted. The frail, grieving mother was gone. In her place stood a defensive and angry woman, accusing the police of trying to destroy her family. "This is absurd. You're dragging my name through the mud based on gossip from a hotel worker," she snapped. Despite her protests, detectives noticed cracks in Isabella's story. She couldn't explain why she and Lena had been spending so much time alone together during the honeymoon, or why they had been overheard in intimate situations that sounded unmistakably sexual. The carefully constructed image of the innocent mother-in-law began to crumble under the pressure of the investigation. By this point, detectives had a strong theory. Isabella and Lena had conspired to murder Victor so they could continue their illicit relationship without him in the way. Isabella's possessiveness over both her son and her lover was a driving force. She couldn't stand the idea of losing Lena, especially to someone as important as her own son. Though Isabella denied any involvement, the police were becoming more certain they were closing in on the truth. Her evasive responses and the mounting evidence only deepened their suspicions. The once powerful matriarch now found herself at the center of a scandal she had worked hard to keep hidden. By June 28, 2013, the investigation reached a tipping point. Detectives had uncovered enough evidence to directly connect Isabella Ruiz to her son's murder. The shocking revelation of her affair with Lena, combined with the testimony of the receptionist, who overheard the two women having sex in the same room as Victor while he slept, painted a disturbing picture. The grieving mother had now become the prime suspect, and investigators believed she played an active role in Victor's death. Isabella Ruiz, 78, was known for her manipulative nature. She orchestrated every aspect of his existence, from his finances to his relationships. However, her relationship with Lena Castillo, her daughter-in-law, was even more troubling. It extended beyond familial bounds into a secret, sordid affair that ultimately led the two women to plot Victor's demise. On the night of the murder, Isabella, who possessed the villainous mind of a cartoon supervillain, slipped sleeping pills into Victor's drink. Meanwhile, Lena distracted him with sex. Once Victor was unconscious, Isabella and Lena dragged his body to the beach, staging his death to look like a tragic drowning accident. They hoped the ocean currents would erase any trace of their involvement, but forensic experts soon uncovered bruises on Victor's neck and traces of sedatives in his system. The police arrested Isabella Ruiz at her Santa Cruz estate. It was a quiet afternoon, and she was enjoying her daily cup of tea on her front porch when officers arrived. She was taken into custody without a fight and maintained her innocence, showing little emotion as the handcuffs clicked into place, seemingly expecting the arrest all along. Lina Castillo was also arrested, but further investigation revealed that Isabella had masterminded the entire plan, with Lina deeply under her influence. The news of Isabella's arrest shocked Victor's family and friends. Those who once admired her for her strength and sharp wit were now horrified by the truth. The trial of Isabella Ruiz began in November 2014 and quickly became one of the most talked about cases among true crime enthusiasts in California. The prosecution, led by Assistant State Attorney James O'Connor, argued that Isabella had killed her own son to preserve her secret affair with Lina. O'Connor used the shocking details of the mother-daughter-in-law relationship to paint Isabella as a manipulative and cold-hearted killer. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Mark Randall, tried to portray Isabella Ruiz as a frail old woman who could not possibly have orchestrated such a crime. Randall painted Lina Castillo as the true mastermind, claiming that Isabella had been manipulated into covering up for her daughter-in-law. However, Isabella's stern demeanor on the stand did little to win the jury's sympathy, and they were clearly disturbed by the sordid details of the case. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury took just 2 hours to reach a verdict. Isabella Ruiz was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Lina Castillo, though charged as an accessory to murder, received a lighter sentence of 25 years after cooperating with investigators. The verdict brought some relief to Victor's family, but the damage left behind by the shocking betrayal would never fully heal. Many felt that justice had been served, but Victor's tragic death and the circumstances surrounding it left a dark cloud over the Ruiz family for years to come. After the trial, life changed drastically for everyone involved. Isabella Ruiz, the mother convicted of murdering her son, was sent to a state prison in California. Despite her sharp wit and strong personality, life behind bars proved challenging. Isabella tried to maintain her dignity, but the isolation and stigma of her crime weighed heavily on her. In prison, she was often the target of gossip and disdain from other inmates. Over the years, Isabella's health began to decline, and in 2021 she contracted COVID-19 during a surge in cases. Despite efforts to treat her, she passed away alone in a prison hospital. News of her death made headlines, with some former friends and family expressing mixed feelings about her fate. Lina Castillo, Victor's widow, faced a different kind of consequence after her reduced sentence of 25 years. She served her time in a women's correctional facility, often reminiscing about her life before the murder. During her incarceration, she sought therapy to deal with her feelings of guilt and confusion about her relationships. Lina maintained her innocence regarding the actual murder but acknowledged her role in the events that unfolded. Amy Liu, the young yoga instructor who had become entangled in the scandal, also faced her own struggles. Though Amy was never charged with any crime, the fallout from the trial affected her reputation. She continued to work at the resort for a few years after the events, but the whispers of the affair haunted her. In search of a fresh start, Amy eventually moved to Los Angeles, California, where she enrolled in college. Rachel Martinez couldn't pinpoint the exact moment her perfect life began to unravel, but she could trace the threads of her story back to where they first intertwined with Miguel's, that fateful property showing in the summer of 2015. Standing in her home office in the Horizon Tower, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's betrayal, she found herself replaying those early memories with newfound clarity. Born to academic parents in Santa Monica in 1990, Rachel had grown up with an almost obsessive attention to detail, a trait inherited from her mathematician father that would later prove both a blessing and a curse. Her childhood home had been a haven of logical thinking and emotional intelligence, with her mother's psychology practice providing a constant backdrop of human behavioral analysis. These influences shaped her into someone who could read both spreadsheets and people with equal precision. Her path to real estate hadn't been direct. After graduating from UCLA with honors in business administration, she had dabbled in investment banking, but found the work unfulfilling. It was during her first serious relationship, a 2-year engagement that ended with her fiancé's infidelity, that she discovered her talent for property. The process of finding her own place after the breakup had been therapeutic, and her analytical mind found satisfaction in the complex dynamics of real estate transactions. By 2015, at age 25, Rachel had established herself as one of Los Angeles' rising stars in luxury real estate. She had also built careful walls around her heart, the betrayal of her past relationship leaving her with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a carefully maintained set of defenses. Then Miguel Martinez walked into her life, and those defenses crumbled like sand castles in the tide. The property showing was for a $12 million beachfront estate in Malibu. Miguel arrived 15 minutes early, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of success without trying too hard. His smile lit up the marble foyer as he introduced himself, and Rachel felt an immediate spark of connection that both thrilled and terrified her. "I apologize for my early arrival," he had said, his slight accent adding charm to his words. "I find that punctuality is a poor substitute for eagerness." The line should have been cheesy, but delivered with his warm brown eyes fixed on hers, it felt like poetry. What followed was the stuff of local legend in their social circle. Their 3-hour property tour turned into dinner, which became a weekend of intense conversation and undeniable chemistry. Miguel pursued Rachel with a single-minded focus that swept away her reservations. Every detail was perfect. Flowers delivered to her office, surprise lunch dates, handwritten notes left on her car. He seemed to anticipate her every need, creating a courtship that felt like a fairy tale. Looking back, Rachel could now see how Miguel had perfectly crafted his approach. He had studied her, understanding that her analytical mind needed logical progression while her wounded heart craved romantic gestures. He built their relationship like one of his construction projects, with careful planning and flawless execution. Miguel's own story, as he told it then, seemed equally perfect. Born in Mexico City in 1988, he had come to the United States at age 10 when his father's construction business expanded northward. He had worked his way up from job sites to project management, eventually starting his own company. His success was self-made, his ambitions seemingly matched only by his devotion to Rachel. What Rachel didn't know then, what she would only discover years later through painstaking investigation, was that Miguel's charm had left a trail of broken hearts across Los Angeles' professional landscape. His construction company had provided the perfect cover for a pattern of seduction and manipulation that spanned years. Female clients, architects, and project managers had all fallen victim to his carefully orchestrated romances. Their whirlwind courtship culminated in a proposal after just 6 months. Miguel arranged a private sunset dinner on the rooftop of what would become their home, the exclusive Horizon Tower. He had supposedly just completed the building's construction, though Rachel would later learn this too was part of his elaborate web of deception. The proposal was witnessed by a random photographer who happened to capture the moment perfectly, and their engagement appeared in several local magazines. Rachel threw herself into their relationship with the same intensity she brought to her career. She scaled back her working hours, turned down opportunities for expansion, and focused on creating their perfect home. Her friends warned her she was moving too fast, but she dismissed their concerns. After all, she was the one who understood numbers, patterns, and probability. She had built a life centered around her children, working hard to create a stable, loving home in their quiet Minnesota community. Those who knew Victoria best said she approached motherhood with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything in life. Her boys were her world, and she had carefully chosen the Riverside Apartments complex for its safe neighborhood and proximity to their school. Every morning, she would wait early to make their breakfast, never missing a school event or sports game. The thought that she would miss her birthday breakfast with them was unthinkable to those who knew her dedication as a mother. Victoria always saw the good in everyone, her sister would later write in a heartbreaking social media post. That's who she was, someone who believed in giving people a chance, in the basic goodness of others. This trusting nature, a quality that made her so beloved in her community, would ultimately be exploited by the man who took her life. The day before her murder, Victoria had been excitedly planning her 39th birthday celebration with her sons. She had promised them a special breakfast the next morning, followed by a day at their favorite park. Her last text to her best friend read, "Can't wait for tomorrow, another year older, but grateful for every moment with my boys." Those words would later be read at her memorial service, a testament to the devoted mother whose life was cut tragically short. Victoria's apartment reflected her personality, warm, welcoming, and filled with photos of her children. On her refrigerator, investigators found a calendar marked with her son's activities, upcoming school events, and her own birthday circled in bright red marker. The morning she was killed, she had planned to open birthday cards her boys had carefully hidden in the kitchen cabinet the night before. What made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was how hard Victoria had worked to create a safe, stable life. She was known for being cautious,
especially when it came to her children's safety. Her decision to trust Christopher Neal that night seemed out of character to those who knew her best, but friends later recalled how he had cleverly used their shared hometown connection to lower her guard. She probably felt safe because he knew all the same places, all the same people. One friend noted. He used that familiarity to make her feel comfortable. The investigation would reveal that Victoria had spent that final evening at a bar she knew well, surrounded by familiar faces. She wasn't the type to go home with strangers, but Neal had spent hours gaining her confidence, playing on their shared background and appearing harmless. Security footage showed him acting charming and friendly, giving no indication of the violence that would follow. August 11, 2024, started as a typical summer evening in Sauk Rapids. Victoria had decided to stop by Murphy's Bar, a local establishment she frequently visited with friends, for a quiet drink before her birthday. The security footage from that night would later become crucial evidence, capturing every moment of her fateful encounter with Christopher Neal. At 11:47 p.m., cameras showed Victoria entering the bar wearing a blue summer dress, her favorite silver necklace catching the light. She chose a seat at the corner of the bar, ordering what would be her first and only drink of the night. It was around midnight when Christopher Neal first approached her. The security footage showed him deliberately choosing the seat next to her, despite several empty spaces at the bar. What initially seemed like a chance encounter would later reveal itself as something more calculated. Neal, as captured on the bar's cameras, spent the next hour engaging Victoria in conversation. He mentioned knowing her hometown, dropping names of places and people she knew. With each shared connection, Victoria's natural wariness seemed to fade. The footage showed her becoming more animated, laughing at his stories, her guard lowering with each passing minute. He seemed so normal, so familiar. The bartender would later tell investigators. They looked like old friends catching up, but Neal was far from the harmless figure he portrayed. Just 9 days earlier, he had been released on bail for a violent strangulation attack, a fact Victoria had no way of knowing as she sat beside him. At 1 a.m., the cameras captured what would be Victoria's final moments in public. Neal had offered to drive her home, citing concerns about her safety. The bitter irony of this gesture wouldn't be lost on investigators. Victoria was seen gathering her purse, her car keys glinting in her hand as she led the way to her black Chevy Equinox. The drive to Riverside Apartments took only 5 minutes. Security cameras in the parking lot recorded their arrival at 1:05 a.m. Victoria appeared relaxed, laughing at something Neal said as they walked toward the building's entrance. She used her key fob to let them in, the door closing behind them at 1:07 a.m. It would be the last time Victoria was seen alive. What transpired in the next 2 hours would only be pieced together through forensic evidence and the signs of struggle left behind. The layout of Victoria's apartment suggested she had initially invited Neal in willingly, perhaps for coffee or conversation.
2 cups were found on the kitchen counter, one with traces of lipstick matching Victoria's shade, the other untouched. The violence appeared to have erupted suddenly. Evidence indicated that Victoria had fought desperately for her life. Her broken nails, the overturned furniture, and the scattered contents of her purse painted a picture of a terrifying struggle. The medical examiner would later determine that the attack lasted several minutes, with Victoria conscious and fighting throughout most of it. At precisely 3 a.m., security cameras captured Neal leaving the building alone. His earlier friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by furtive glances and attempts to hide his face. He carried Victoria's car keys, which investigators noted had been in her purse, not on the counter as he would later claim. The footage showed him getting into Victoria's Equinox and driving away, leaving her lying lifeless in the apartment where she had built a home for her children. The investigation into Victoria's murder shifted into high gear once detectives realized they weren't just dealing with a random act of violence, but potentially the work of a serial offender. The crime scene at Riverside Apartments became a focal point of forensic activity, with investigators meticulously documenting every detail of the tragic final moments of Victoria's life. The medical examiner's findings painted a horrific picture of Victoria's final struggle. The bruising patterns on her neck told a story that contradicted Neal's claims of innocence. These weren't the marks of a brief encounter, noted the lead forensic investigator. The injuries showed sustained pressure, applied with practiced precision. Most disturbing was the similarity to the injuries reported in Neal's previous assault case, a pattern that suggested not just violence, but a signature method of attack. DNA evidence would prove crucial to the investigation. Swabs taken from Victoria's neck revealed genetic material from 2 sources. Neal's DNA emerged as the dominant profile, particularly concentrated in areas showing the worst bruising. A second, Weaker DNA profile was also detected, but investigators quickly determined this likely came from casual contact earlier in the day, perhaps from one of her children or a friend. Victoria's apartment, typically kept immaculate for her children, had become a map of her final fight for life. A broken lamp in the living room suggested where the attack began. Scattered cushions and an overturned coffee table traced her desperate attempt to escape. Most telling was her bedroom, where investigators found her phone still plugged into its charger. She never had a chance to call for help. The evidence trail extended beyond the apartment. Security footage from neighboring buildings captured Neil's exit from the complex in Victoria's car. Traffic cameras tracked the black Chevy Equinox heading south on Highway 10, then merging onto Interstate 35. Each ping from Victoria's stolen cell phone helped investigators track Neil's flight to Louisiana, where he apparently believed he could evade detection. When authorities finally caught up with Neil at a motel just outside New Orleans, they found more damning evidence. Victoria's car keys were in his pocket, her credit cards in his wallet. Her phone had been wiped clean and abandoned in a dumpster 3 states away. These weren't the actions of someone who, as Neil claimed, had left a woman alive and well in her apartment. Most incriminating was Neil's behavior during questioning. His claim of limited memory about the events in Victoria's apartment stood in stark contrast to his precise recall of their earlier conversation at the bar. He remembered details about their shared hometown but claimed to forget her name. When shown photos of Victoria's apartment, he recognized where he had been but insisted he couldn't remember what had happened there. The autopsy results delivered the final pieces of evidence needed to build a solid case. Victoria had died between 2:30 and 3 a.m., exactly the time frame when Neil was still in her apartment. The cause of death was manual strangulation, with defensive wounds on her hands and arms showing she had fought desperately until her last breath. Most chillingly, the method of strangulation matched exactly the technique described by Neil's previous victim, a woman who had survived to tell her story just 9 days earlier. Christopher Neil's path to becoming Victoria's alleged killer didn't begin the night they met at Murphy's bar. As investigators dug deeper into his past, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of escalating violence that painted a picture of a predator growing increasingly bold and dangerous with each passing year. Just 9 days before Victoria's murder, on August 1, 2024, Neil had faced charges for a strikingly similar attack. In that case, he had allegedly strangled a woman he was dating in Akin County. The victim survived to tell a haunting story that would later mirror Victoria's final moments. He seemed so normal at first, she had told police. Then something changed in his eyes, and his hands were around my throat. Despite the severity of this attack, Neil was released on bail on August 3rd, given a no-contact order, and walked free. But this wasn't just about 2 isolated incidents. As investigators pieced together Neil's history, they found a trail of police reports, restraining orders, and domestic disturbance calls stretching back years. Women in different counties had reported similar encounters, charm turning to violence, with strangulation being his weapon of choice. Most cases had been handled as routine domestic disputes, the pattern going unnoticed until it was too late. The evolution of Neil's violence was particularly chilling. He had started with domestic incidents, attacking women who knew him. Victoria represented a deadly escalation, the first time he had allegedly targeted a stranger. The shift from domestic violence to attacking someone he had just met showed a predator growing more confident, more brazen in his choices of victims. His method of approaching victims revealed careful calculation. With Victoria, he had used their shared hometown connection to gain trust. Security footage from Murphy's bar showed him watching her for nearly an hour before making his move, waiting until she was alone before approaching. This wasn't opportunistic violence. It was practiced, planned predation. Even more disturbing was Neil's behavior after each attack. In previous cases, he had shown a pattern of minimizing his actions, claiming memory loss, or insisting the women had exaggerated their injuries. With Victoria's case, he followed the same playbook, admitting to being in her apartment but claiming no memory of the violence, despite the clear evidence of his deliberate actions afterward. The violation of his no-contact order from the August 1st case revealed another aspect of Neil's personality, a complete disregard for legal restrictions. On the very day Victoria's body was discovered, August 12th, the Akin County Sheriff's Office was already processing paperwork for his violation of the order. He had allegedly attempted to contact his previous victim, showing a pattern of continued harassment that would only end with his arrest for Victoria's murder. What made Neil particularly dangerous was his ability to appear harmless. Bar patrons who saw him with Victoria described him as charming, well-spoken, and completely normal. This facade of normality allowed him to move through society virtually undetected, making him the kind of predator that law enforcement finds most challenging to stop before tragedy strikes. The manhunt for Christopher Neal ended at the Red Pine Motel, a rundown establishment just outside New Orleans, Louisiana. After nearly a week of tracking cell phone signals and following Victoria's stolen credit card transactions, authorities finally closed in on August 18, 2024. They found Victoria's black Chevy Equinox parked outside room 114, its Minnesota plates covered with mud in an apparent attempt to avoid detection. The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Neal surrendered without resistance when federal marshals and local police breached his room at 6:15 a.m. He was found fully dressed, lying on top of the bed covers, as if he had been expecting them. In his possession were Victoria's car keys, credit cards, and apartment key fob, items he had taken from her purse after allegedly taking her life. What struck investigators was Neal's demeanor during arrest. He showed no emotion, no signs of distress or surprise. When informed he was being charged with Victoria's murder, he reportedly just nodded and said, "I want a lawyer." This cold composure contrasted sharply with the violent struggle evidenced in Victoria's apartment just days before. The charges against Neal began to stack up quickly. In Benton County, where Victoria's murder occurred, prosecutors filed second-degree murder charges. The criminal complaint detailed the brutality of the attack, citing the medical examiner's findings of severe neck trauma and defensive wounds. The DNA evidence, security footage, and Neal's flight to Louisiana were listed as key elements supporting the murder charge. But Neal's legal troubles extended beyond Victoria's case. In Akin County, he still faced charges for the August 1st strangulation attack. The violation of his no-contact order from that case added another charge. Prosecutors in both counties began coordinating their efforts, building a case that would show Neal's pattern of escalating violence. During his first court appearance in Benton County, Neal maintained his story of limited memory about the night of Victoria's death. Through his court-appointed attorney, he entered a not guilty plea. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They described a calculated predator who had watched Victoria at the bar, gained her trust through manipulation, and then killed her in her own home. The bail hearing revealed the full extent of the prosecution's concerns about Neal's danger to society. They presented evidence of his previous strangulation attack, the violated no-contact order, and his attempt to flee the state. The judge, noting the escalating pattern of violence and flight risk, ordered Neal held without bail, a decision that brought visible relief to Victoria's family in the courtroom. As Neal was led away in shackles, attention turned to the broader implications of his case. Questions arose about how he had been free to allegedly kill Victoria despite the recent strangulation charge. The prosecutor's office faced scrutiny over their handling of his previous case, where he had been released on bail despite showing clear signs of being a danger to women. In the quiet Minnesota town of Sauk Rapids, the impact of Victoria's murder rippled through the community like shockwaves. Her two young boys, who had waited eagerly for their mother to join them for birthday breakfast that August morning, now faced a future without her guidance, love, and ever-present smile. Their lives, once filled with the routine of school days and their mother's constant presence, had been shattered by one night of senseless violence. Victoria's family launched a GoFundMe page, not just to cover funeral expenses, but to create a trust fund for her son's future. The page became a testament to who Victoria was, filled with stories from those who knew her. She was more than just a victim, wrote her sister. Victoria was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it. She taught her boys to be kind, to be strong, and to always help others. Now we have to help them carry on without her. The local community's response was overwhelming. Murphy's Bar, where Victoria spent her final hours, hosted a fundraiser for her children. Regular patrons shared stories of her infectious laugh, her proud conversations about her boys' achievements, and her bubbly personality that could brighten even the darkest days. She wasn't just another customer, the bartender recalled. Victoria was family to everyone who knew her, but beneath the outpouring of support ran an undercurrent of anger and frustration. Victoria's death had exposed critical failures in a system designed to protect vulnerable individuals. Her family spoke out publicly about these systemic gaps. 9 days, her brother said during a community meeting, just 9 days between Neal's release and Victoria's death. The system had him in custody, knew he was dangerous, and still let him walk free. The impact of Victoria's death extended beyond her immediate circle. Local domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls for help, with many women citing her story as their wake-up call. The Sauk Rapids Police Department began reviewing its protocols for handling strangulation cases, acknowledging that these incidents often precede more serious violence. In a cruel twist of fate, Victoria's birthday, August 12, now marks both her death and her legacy. Her family has established the Victoria Gamble Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence and advocating for stricter bail conditions in strangulation cases. "We couldn't save Victoria," her mother said at the foundation's launch, "but maybe we can save someone else's daughter, someone else's mother." As Christopher Neal awaits trial in Benton County, Victoria's story continues to resonate. Her death has become a catalyst for change, prompting discussions about how the justice system handles violent offenders and the need for better protection for potential victims. But for those who loved her, Victoria was more than a cautionary tale or a statistic. She was a mother who lived for her children, a friend who never failed to lift others up, and a woman whose trust in others ultimately cost her everything. Today, Victoria's apartment at Riverside remains empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that unfolded there. Her black Chevy Equinox, recovered from Louisiana, sits in an evidence lot, but her spirit lives on through her sons, through the foundation bearing her name, and through the changes her death has inspired in her community. While it's too late for Victoria, her story serves as both a warning and a call to action, a reminder that patterns of violence, left unchecked, can escalate with devastating consequences. July 15, 2018, 3:47 p.m. The thermometer on the pristine porch of 1242 Maple Drive read 97 degrees. But the real story wasn't the Memphis heat. Behind the freshly painted cream walls and meticulously maintained rose gardens of this East Memphis showpiece, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shatter the carefully constructed illusions of Magnolia Heights forever. Sarah Mitchell's Victorian mansion stood as a monument to perfection, every blade of grass measured, every window gleaming in the Tennessee sun. But perfection, as the residents of this exclusive suburb would soon learn, often comes at a devastating price. The thing about Sarah, Barbara Watson would later tell the grand jury, her hands trembling around a glass of water, was that she worked so hard to make everything look perfect. Maybe too hard. Sarah Mitchell hadn't always been the widow of Maple Drive. 8 months ago, she'd been Sarah Mitchell, wife of James Mitchell, one of Memphis's most successful real estate developers. At 42, she was what her friends called preserved, a woman who fought aging with the same determination she'd once used to climb the real estate rankings. Her chocolate brown hair was always freshly highlighted, her tennis skirts precisely the right length to suggest country club propriety while hinting at something more. The $2 million life insurance policy James left her meant she never had to work again. The 4-bedroom Victorian meant she had space to host the neighborhood's most coveted dinner parties. But money couldn't fill the silence in her king-sized bed, couldn't replace the sound of her husband's keys in the door every evening at 6. After James died, something changed in her eyes. Lisa Anderson, her next-door neighbor, would observe during the investigation. Like she was hungry for something money couldn't buy. That hunger found its target in Kevin Anderson, Lisa's 17-year-old son. 6 feet 2 inches of junior Olympic swimming potential living just over the pristine hedge that separated their properties. Team captain with a 4.2 GPA and shoulders that made the mothers at Swim Meets Whisper behind their hands. The University of Texas had already dangled a full scholarship in front of him, contingent on his performance at the state championships. Kevin was different from the other boys, Coach Thompson would testify. More mature, maybe too mature for his own good. You see it sometimes with kids raised by single parents. They grow up too fast. Lisa Anderson had raised Kevin alone since his father disappeared with his secretary and most of their savings when Kevin was 5. Working double shifts in the Methodist Hospital ER, she'd somehow managed to get them into Magnolia Heights, determined to give her son the opportunities she never had. The swimming scholarship was supposed to be their ticket to something better. "I should have seen it coming," Lisa would sob in the witness stand months later. The signs were all there. The new clothes he couldn't explain. The late-night texts. The way he started missing morning practice to help Mrs. Mitchell with the yard. What kind of yard work happens at 7 a.m.? James Mitchell's death had been sudden. A massive heart attack during his morning jog. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The health-conscious businessman who never smoked, never drank, dropped dead on the running trail he'd helped fund through his charitable foundation. He left behind not just a grieving widow, but a legacy of community involvement that made Sarah's position in neighborhood society untouchable. Or so everyone thought. Barbara Watson, a retired English teacher whose bay window offered a perfect view of the Mitchell property, kept a detailed diary of neighborhood activities, a habit she'd never broken since her teaching days. Her entries would later become crucial to Detective Michael Torres's investigation. The boy was over there all the time, she would tell him, flipping through pages of careful observations. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A teenager helping a widow with house maintenance. But then I noticed the way she watched him from her kitchen window. The way her hand would linger on his arm during their conversations. I taught high school for 30 years, detective. I know what trouble looks like before it happens. Coach Thompson had been the first to notice the changes in Kevin's performance. The boy who'd been seconds away from breaking the state record in the 200-meter freestyle was suddenly struggling to maintain his captain position. His time started slipping in June, Thompson would report. I asked if everything was okay at home. He said he was just tired from doing extra work to help his mom with bills. I should have pushed harder for answers. Detective Michael Torres, a 20-year veteran of Memphis homicide, would later piece together the pattern that everyone had seen but no one had wanted to acknowledge. A widow too young and too beautiful, struggling with grief and loneliness. A teenage boy mature beyond his years, carrying the weight of his mother's sacrifices. A neighborhood too focused on maintaining appearances to see the tragedy unfolding behind perfectly trimmed hedges. In cases like these, Torres would later write in his report, everyone thinks they know the whole story. The grieving widow, the helpful neighbor boy, the concerned community. But behind closed doors, behind those perfect facades, there's always another layer. And sometimes, peeling back those layers reveals something that no one wants to see. Sarah Mitchell maintained her social calendar with military precision that summer. Wednesday book club, Thursday tennis, Sunday brunch at the country club. Everything designed to show the world she was handling widowhood with grace and dignity. But the cracks were starting to show. She started missing tennis matches, her doubles partner would later recall. She who never missed a game, not even the week after James died. And when she did show up, she seemed distracted, kept checking her phone. We all assumed she was dating again. We just never imagined. The stage was set. The players were in position. And in the stifling heat of a Memphis summer, behind the pristine facade of 1242 Maple Drive, a story of desire, desperation, and death was about to unfold that would leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their perfect neighborhood. Magnolia Heights wasn't just any Memphis suburb. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of old money and new ambitions. Streets named after flowers curved gracefully between homes that started at 7 figures, each one trying to outshine its neighbor while pretending not to try at all. The kind of neighborhood where gardeners arrived every Thursday at exactly 9 a.m. And deviation from this schedule was cause for urgent discussion at the Weekend Garden Club. The Mitchell house sat at the intersection of Maple Drive and Magnolia Circle, commanding attention from every angle. A 3-story Victorian painted in historical cream with hunter green trim. It boasted original stained glass windows that cast colorful shadows across the wraparound porch. The house had been James's wedding gift to Sarah, purchased when she was still a rising star at Memphis Elite Realty. The layout was like something from Architectural Digest, Detective Torres would note in his initial report. Main floor, formal living room, dining room, gourmet kitchen opening to a family room with French doors leading to the pool area. Second floor, master suite, 3 bedrooms converted to a home office, library, and gym. Third floor, what Mrs. Mitchell called her private retreat, significant to the case's later developments. But it was the pool house that would become the focal point of the investigation. A recent addition James had completed just months before his death. It featured a changing area, full bathroom, and a small kitchenette. The perfect pool house for entertaining, Sarah had once boasted at a garden club meeting.
She didn't know then how those words would come back to haunt her. The social hierarchy of Magnolia Heights operated on subtle but rigid rules. At the top sat the founding families, those who'd been there since the suburb's inception in the 1960s. The Mitchells, despite their wealth, were relatively new money, just 12 years in the neighborhood. But James's philanthropy and Sarah's social finesse had earned them acceptance among the elite. The Andersons, living in what was arguably the most modest home in Magnolia Heights, existed on the periphery of this social structure. Lisa's position as an ER nurse garnered respect, but her single mother status and mortgage struggles kept her from full acceptance into the inner circle. 8 months after James's death, the neighborhood was still adjusting to its new dynamic. Sarah's position had shifted, no longer half of Magnolia Heights' power couple, but not quite relegated to the ranks of the other widows who lived quietly with their memories and cats. She existed in a sort of social limbo, maintained by her wealth and her legendary dinner parties. The summer of 2018 pressed down on Memphis like a hot, wet blanket. Air conditioners hummed constantly, and the normally busy sidewalks emptied by 10 a.m. as residents retreated into their climate-controlled sanctuaries. But behind drawn curtains and closed doors, tensions were building. Sarah's isolation grew incrementally, like shadows lengthening across her perfect lawn. First, she missed a tennis match, a previously unthinkable occurrence. Then the Wednesday book club began meeting at Caroline Peterson's house instead of hers. She said she was redecorating. Caroline would later tell Detective Torres. But we could see Kevin Anderson's truck parked in her driveway through the front window. The yard work became a neighborhood talking point, though never directly addressed. Kevin would arrive early, often before the dew had dried on the grass. His sessions grew longer, more frequent. The lawn that only needed mowing once a week somehow required attention every other day. I saw him washing her car one morning, Barbara Watson noted in her journal, shirtless, while she watched from the porch. In my day, we had more discretion. Lisa Anderson's concerns grew with each passing week. The scholarship offers that had once crowded their mailbox dwindled to a trickle. Kevin's times in the pool kept slipping, tenths of seconds adding up to missed opportunities. He was making money, Lisa would later tell the grand jury. Her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a double shift. But things weren't adding up. New clothes, an expensive watch, more than yard work should pay. When I asked, he said Mrs. Mitchell was generous with tips. Something in my gut told me there was more to it. The financial pressures in the Anderson household mounted. Lisa had taken out a second mortgage to keep them in Magnolia Heights, banking everything on Kevin's swimming scholarship. Each missed practice, each declined time, was another crack in their carefully planned future. Coach Thompson's concerns became more urgent. It wasn't just his times, he would testify. His focus was gone. He'd space out during team meetings, check his phone constantly. I caught him texting during practice, something the old Kevin would never have done. The whispers started at the country club, spread through tennis matches and garden club meetings. Sarah's behavior became a source of carefully worded concern. Her clothes got younger, tighter. The dinner parties that had once been elegant affairs became louder, lasted later. Looking back, Barbara Watson would later say, "We all saw what was happening. We just didn't want to believe it. Not in our neighborhood, not with our people, but in Magnolia Heights, where appearance was everything and secrets were currency. The truth was about to explode into the open in a way that no amount of social finesse could smooth over." June 8, 2018 marked the beginning of a tragedy that would shatter Magnolia Heights forever. The morning started like any other. Kevin Anderson arrived at 9:30 a.m. to clean the Mitchell pool, a job he'd been doing 3 times a week since James's death. Sarah Mitchell watched from her kitchen window, nursing what she would later admit to Detective Torres was her third mimosa of the morning. It would have been James's birthday. Sarah's voice would crack during questioning. He would have been 46. I found his gift in the back of my closet that morning, a Rolex I'd bought months before. I couldn't stop staring at it. The temperature had already hit 91 degrees, and Kevin had stripped off his shirt as he skimmed leaves from the pool. At 17, his swimmer's physique drew glances from neighborhood girls, but until that morning, Sarah had maintained professional distance. I heard her crying before I saw her,
Kevin's statement would read, "Not loud crying. That quiet kind that's somehow worse." She was standing there in a white tennis dress, holding a glass of lemonade, and just breaking. The security camera footage would later show Sarah's approach to the pool. 10:47 a.m., her steps unsteady, mascara slightly smeared. She stood watching Kevin work for 3 full minutes before speaking. "I miss him so much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone expects me to be over it by now. 8 months is enough grieving, they say. Back to tennis, back to book club, back to normal." She laughed bitterly. What's normal about sleeping alone in a bed meant for two? Kevin, unprepared for such raw emotion, did what he'd been raised to do. He listened. He set down the pool skimmer and faced her fully, offering the kind of attention that lonely people crave. She wasn't Mrs. Mitchell in that moment, he would later tell his lawyer. She was just Sarah, a person drowning in grief while everyone else was swimming in their perfect lives. The touch came naturally, her hand on his bare arm as she spoke, his awkward pat on her shoulder turning into something more lingering. The security footage shows them standing close, too close, for several minutes. "I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months," Sarah's diary would reveal. "He looked at me like I was real, not just James Mitchell's widow putting on a brave face." The kiss, when it came, surprised them both. Neither would later admit to initiating it. But in the privacy of her pool house, surrounded by the scent of chlorine and summer flowers, lines were crossed that could never be uncrossed. "I knew it was wrong," carrying proof of Crawford's previous victims. Security caught her meters from the bridal suite. Crawford pressed no charges. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. The wedding video, later reviewed by investigators, captured telling moments. Crawford's possessive grip during photos. Victoria's flinch when he touched her face. The best man's toast referencing Crawford's appreciation for youth. Most telling was the footage from unused angles. Victoria mouthing, "Help me," to a server. Crawford's whispered threats between poses, security guards blocking all exits. As the reception ended, Victoria stood on the grand staircase for the final photos. Her bouquet landed at Sophie's feet. She had sneaked back in wearing catering staff uniform. It was their last contact before the honeymoon. Inside the flowers, Sophie found a small note, USB in violin. "Show Blackwood everything." The newlyweds departed at midnight for the Maldives. Crawford, ever the showman, carried his bride to the waiting limousine. Guests cheered at the romantic gesture. None saw his fingers digging into her ribs or heard his whispered warning, "Remember our agreement." Accidents happen on honeymoons. Victoria Anderson became Victoria Crawford with a signature and a kiss. She entered a prison built of wealth and threats, sealed by vows and violence. Her wedding was a masterclass in manipulation, a $5 million facade hiding a transaction of power and control. But in her final act of defiance, she had planted the seeds of Crawford's destruction, evidence that would outlive her final days in paradise. Azure Dreams Resort welcomed the Crawfords on July 12, 2022. Villa 247, isolated on the resort's northern tip, became both paradise and prison. Security footage shows Victoria stumbling as they entered. Staff noted her dilated pupils, suggesting forced sedation during the flight. The abuse escalated immediately. Resort cameras captured Victoria running through the beach at 3 a.m. their first night. Crawford's security team intercepting her before she reached the main building. Guest services logged noise complaints from neighboring villas. Furniture being moved, the report stated. The next morning, Victoria appeared at breakfast wearing long sleeves despite the tropical heat. Her last successful contact with Sophie came through a borrowed phone from housekeeping. "He found something on my phone. Photos of documents from his office. He's been talking to someone about cleaning up loose ends. I think this is it. Sophie. If I don't." The call disconnected. The housekeeper was relocated to another property that afternoon. July 14th brought the final pieces into place. Crawford held meetings with unknown visitors in his villa. Staff reported deliveries of unusual supplies, industrial cleaning materials, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, diving equipment. Victoria made 4 attempts to use the resort's business center computer. Each time, security arrived within minutes to escort her back. Hotel staff documented increasing concerns. Head chef Marco Rossi reported Victoria's hands shaking too badly to hold her fork at dinner. Spa therapist Amy Chen noted, severe bruising inconsistent with normal activities. Beach attendant Raj Patel observed Crawford's aggressive handling of Victoria during a supposedly romantic sunset walk. The last verified sighting came at 7:43 p.m. on July 15th. Security footage shows Victoria entering the beachfront restaurant alone, a rare moment without Crawford's surveillance. She borrowed waitress Amora Rashid's phone, made a brief call later traced to a burner phone in Sophie's possession. Her final words recorded, "He knows about the files. All of it. The girls, the islands, everything. I hid." The call cut off. Crawford reported her missing 36 hours later. His timeline claimed she went for a midnight swim. Resort logs show different activity. 8:15 p.m., Crawford meets 2 unidentified men at villa. 9:30 p.m., security cameras on North Beach malfunction. 10:45 p.m., unusual boat activity near villa's private dock. 11:50 p.m., power fluctuation in Villa 247. 2:30 a.m., Crawford's security team loads heavy bags into boat. 4:15 a.m., cleaning crew requested for villa. 5 a.m., Crawford makes first of 3 calls to his lawyers. The crime scene, when finally processed, revealed careful cleanup. However, trace evidence remained. Blood residue in shower drain. Lisa would later sob to Detective Torres. "A mother knows. God help me. I knew something was wrong. I just never imagined, never thought." By early August, the situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sarah had stopped attending book club entirely. Kevin's scholarship offers sat unopened in the mail. They were lost in their own world, blind to the growing suspicions around them. Barbara Watson's final journal entry before the incident would prove prophetic. "Watched Sarah and the Anderson boy by the pool today. There's something dangerous in the way they look at each other. In my 30 years of teaching, I've seen that look before. It never ends well." The fuse was lit. The only question was who would be caught in the explosion. The beginning of the end started with a mother's routine task. On August 2, 2018, Lisa Anderson was doing laundry in her modest Memphis home when she discovered something that would shatter her world. A Cartier receipt tucked into her son's swim team jacket pocket. $7,000, Lisa would later tell Detective Torres. Her nurse's uniform still wrinkled from another double shift. "My son, who made $12 in our cleaning pools, had somehow bought a watch worth more than my monthly mortgage payment." The receipt was just the beginning. Hidden in Kevin's desk drawer, wrapped in an old swim meet program, Lisa found a burner phone filled with messages that made her heart stop. Hundreds of texts to someone saved simply as S, each one more damning than the last. Barbara Watson, still watching from her window across the street, documented the changes in her meticulous journal. "Kevin stopped coming home after practice," she wrote. "His car would appear in the evening, parked 2 streets over, thinking no one would notice. But in Magnolia Heights, someone always notices." At Memphis East High School, Kevin Anderson's transformation from star athlete to troubled teen happened with frightening speed. Janet Myers, the school counselor, began keeping a separate file documenting her concerns. "He was like a different person," Myers would later testify. The focused, ambitious boy who'd never missed a practice was suddenly sleeping through classes. His GPA dropped from a 4.2 to a 2.8 in less than 2 months. Coach Thompson watched helplessly as his star swimmer's times plummeted. Texas called on August 15th, he recalled during the investigation. They said they were re-evaluating their scholarship offer. In coach speak, that means it's already gone. But it was Sarah Mitchell's behavior that truly set the neighborhood tongues wagging. The elegant widow who once hosted Magnolia Heights' most sophisticated dinner parties now appeared disheveled at morning swim meets, wearing clothes that raised knowing eyebrows among the country club set. She stopped trying to hide it, Barbara Watson noted. The way she looked at that boy, like a drowning person looking at air. The financial entanglement deepened with frightening speed. Bank records would later show Sarah making large cash withdrawals, $3,000 here, $5,000 there. Kevin suddenly sported designer clothes and a new MacBook Pro, items his mother's nursing salary couldn't possibly afford. Richard Harrison, the Mitchell family attorney, noticed the suspicious patterns in Sarah's spending. The trust James left had strict provisions, Harrison would testify. Sarah was burning through money like someone who didn't expect to need it much longer. Everything changed on August 20th. A plain white envelope appeared in Sarah's mailbox, containing poolside photos that left nothing to imagination. The blackmailer demanded $50,000 in exchange for silence. Security footage from that evening shows Sarah running barefoot across her manicured lawn to the pool house, phone in hand. The conversation that followed would later be played in court, a frantic woman realizing her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Lisa Anderson finally confronted her son on August 23rd, after finding a handwritten love letter that confirmed her worst fears. The conversation, as she would later tell Detective Torres through tears, revealed how far gone her son already was. He looked at me with James Mitchell's watch on his wrist and lied to my face, Lisa recalled. My son, who'd never so much as missed curfew, stood there telling me I was imagining things while wearing evidence of his lies on his body. The community's whispers turned to shouts when Sarah missed James's memorial service at First Presbyterian. Instead of honoring her dead husband's memory, security cameras at Memphis International Airport captured her with Kevin in the short-term parking lot, engaged in what one witness described as an emotional confrontation. Anonymous tips began flooding school administration, each one more detailed than the last, building a picture that no one wanted to see but couldn't ignore. By August 25th, the school had no choice but to act. Kevin's suspension from the swim team made the local news, another crack in the facade of Magnolia Heights' perfect veneer. The second blackmail demand arrived on August 27th, $100,000 this time, with copies of text messages that would destroy them both. Sarah withdrew the money without hesitation, emptying an account James had set aside for charity donations. Detective Torres would later trace the money's path through 5 different drop locations, each one leading closer to the tragedy that was about to unfold. She was desperate, Torres would testify, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. The final night, August 28th, played out like a Greek tragedy. Security footage shows Sarah pacing her kitchen at 11:47 p.m., phone clutched to her ear like a lifeline. Her last conversation with Kevin, captured by the pool house security system, revealed 2 people who had lost all touch with reality. Sarah's plan was simple in its desperation. They would run away together, start fresh somewhere no one knew them. She had money, connections, dreams of a new life. But Kevin's response shattered more than just their fantasy. "I'm 17, he said, his voice barely a whisper on the recording. When Sarah protested that age was just a number, his reply would later echo through the courtroom. "No, it's evidence." The silence that followed lasted exactly 42 seconds. In less than 24 hours, one of them would be dead, and the other's life would be destroyed forever. But in that moment, in the quiet of a Memphis night, 2 people faced the reality of what they'd become, and what it would cost them both. The tension in Magnolia Heights reached its breaking point in the final days of August 2018. As Lisa Anderson's email to the school board circulated through administrative offices, the carefully maintained privacy of Memphis's elite suburb began to crumble. That email changed everything, Principal Margaret Rhodes would later testify. When a parent explicitly accuses a neighbor of exploiting their child, we can't look the other way, no matter who's involved. The police tip line, which had been quiet for months, suddenly lit up with anonymous calls. Detective Torres's log from August 29th reveals the community's growing panic. 10:15 a.m. Caller reports suspicious meetings in Mitchell Pool House. 11:30 a.m. Anonymous tip about expensive gifts to a minor. 2:45 p.m. Local business owner reports concerning behavior behind Methodist Church. 4:20 p.m. School staff member expresses concerns about student welfare. But it was the video that arrived in Sarah's inbox on August 30th that sent everything spiraling toward its tragic conclusion. Security footage from her own pool house, somehow accessed and copied, showing intimate moments that left no room for denial. The blackmailer knew exactly what they were doing, Detective Torres would later explain. They didn't just threaten to expose the relationship. They proved they could destroy both lives with a single mouse click. The demand was simple: $200,000 by midnight, or the video would be sent to every phone in Magnolia Heights. Sarah's response, captured by her home security system, showed a woman unraveling. She spent 3 hours pacing her kitchen, making frantic calls to her bank, her lawyer, and finally, fatefully, to Kevin. At Memphis East High School, the whispers had become a roar. Kevin's sudden removal from the swim team sparked speculation that reached far beyond the pool deck. Coach Thompson found himself fielding calls from college recruiters, trying to explain the unexplainable. How do you tell Texas that your star swimmer isn't just slipping? He's drowning in something you can't even discuss. Thompson would later ask the grand jury. Lisa Anderson's worst fears were confirmed when she received an anonymous envelope at the hospital where she worked. Inside were photos of her son leaving expensive restaurants with Sarah, receipts for jewelry, hotel charges from neighboring towns. The final item was a handwritten note. Do you know where your son really is when you're working nights? The confrontation that followed shook the Anderson household to its foundation. Lisa, still in her scrubs from a 12-hour shift, waited up until Kevin came home at 2 a.m. I didn't even recognize him anymore, Lisa would sob during her testimony. When I showed him the photos, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with these dead eyes and said, "You don't understand our love." By September 1st, the school administration had no choice but to take official action. An emergency meeting was called, attended by the principal, school counselors, and district administrators. The decision was made to contact the authorities. Sarah's desperation reached new heights when she learned of the school's involvement. Security cameras captured her attempting to enter Memphis East High School at 7:15 a.m., presumably to intercept Kevin before classes. The school's resource officer, recognizing her from swim meets, escorted her off the property. The community's reaction was swift and merciless. The same social circles that had embraced Sarah after James's death now turned their backs. Her tennis club membership was quietly revoked. The Garden Club chose a new location for their weekly meetings. Her name vanished from charity committee lists. Barbara Watson's final journal entry dated September 2nd captured the neighborhood's growing fear. Watched Sarah packing boxes into her car at 3 a.m. The boy was there, helping her. Something's about to break. God help us all when it does. The police, now actively monitoring the situation, noted increased activity at the Mitchell house. Large withdrawals from multiple banks. Travel websites searched on her computer. 2 new burner phones purchased at different locations. Detective Torres, reviewing the evidence later, would identify September 3rd as the point of no return. We found a half-written letter in Sarah's study, he would testify. It started as an apology to her dead husband and ended as a goodbye note to Kevin. That's when we knew we were racing against time. The final 24 hours saw a flurry of activity. Sarah liquidated one of her larger investment accounts. Kevin skipped school entirely, his absence noted but not reported given the ongoing investigation. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Sarah's Mercedes at the Memphis International Airport, then later at a small private airfield outside the city. The last person to speak to them both was, ironically, Lisa Anderson. Her call to Detective Torres at 11:42 p.m. on September 3rd would be the catalyst for everything that followed. My son just came home to pack a bag. He said he's leaving with her. Said they have it all planned out. Please stop them before it's too late. As midnight approached on September 3rd, 2018, the temperature in Memphis still hung at 85 degrees. Security cameras caught final images of Sarah Mitchell entering her pool house at 11:58 p.m. Kevin Anderson's car was seen turning onto Maple Drive at 12:03 a.m. What happened in the next 4 to 5 minutes would leave one person dead, another facing life in prison, and a community forever changed by the consequences of secrets too dangerous to keep. September 4th, 2018, 12:03 a.m. The security cameras at 1242 Maple Drive captured Kevin Anderson's silver Honda Civic turning into Sarah Mitchell's driveway, headlights off. The temperature still lingered at 85 degrees, the Memphis air thick with late summer humidity and approaching tragedy. The timestamp on that footage haunts me, Detective Torres would later confess. If we'd been 5 minutes faster, maybe things would have ended differently. Sarah Mitchell waited in the pool house, surrounded by hastily packed bags and stacks of cash withdrawn from 3 different banks. The security footage shows her pacing, checking her phone, jumping at every sound. On the antique desk that James had restored lay 2 one-way tickets to Cancun, departing at 6:15 a.m., purchased under false names. 12:07 a.m., Kevin enters the pool house. The exterior camera captures his expression. Not the love-struck teenager of previous months, but something harder, colder. He carried a backpack that police would later find contained his passport and Sarah's love letters. You could feel the tension through the surveillance video, Torres noted. The way they moved around each other. This wasn't a meeting of lovers. This was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The pool house security system recorded their final confrontation in chilling detail. Sarah, clutching airline tickets, laying out their escape plan. Kevin, standing by the door, his swimmer's frame rigid with newfound resolve. "I can't do this anymore." His words would later be transcribed for the jury. "My mom knows everything. The school's involved. This has to end." Sarah's response, as described by the forensics team analyzing the audio, shifted from pleading to rage. The woman who had once hosted Magnolia Heights' most elegant dinner parties was now screaming, her words echoing off the pool house walls. 12:23 a.m., the first signs of violence. A splash as something, later identified as a crystal vase, shattered against the wall. Sarah's voice, hysterical now. "You promised me. You said you loved me." The security footage shows Kevin turning to leave. Sarah grabbing his arm, her manicured nails leaving marks that would later be photographed by crime scene investigators. The struggle that followed lasted exactly 97 seconds. The physical evidence tells the story. Medical examiner Dr. Patricia Chen would testify. The victim fell backward, striking their head on the corner of the antique desk. The angle of impact, combined with the force, death would have been almost instantaneous. 12:27 a.m., the pool house falls silent. The exterior camera captures Kevin stumbling out, his white tennis shirt stained red. He stands there for 42 seconds, staring at his hands in the moonlight, before walking to his car with mechanical precision. Lisa Anderson's call to 911, recorded at 12:45 a.m., captures a mother's worst nightmare. "My son just came home. There's blood. Oh God, there's so much blood. He's not making sense. Please hurry." The first responders arrived at 1242 Maple Drive at 12:52 a.m. Officer James Rodriguez was first on scene. The pool house lights were still on, door wide open. You could smell the copper tang of blood from the driveway. Inside, they found Sarah Mitchell sprawled across the antique desk, her emerald green dress now stained a darker shade. The escape plan scattered around her, airline tickets, stacks of cash, a half-written letter to Kevin that would never be finished. The scene told a story of desperation. Crime scene investigator Maria Sanchez would report. Broken glass everywhere, overturned furniture, a struggle between 2 people who had crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. By 1:15 a.m., Maple Drive was awash in red and blue lights. Neighbors in silk pajamas and hastily tied robes gathered behind police tape, watching as crime scene technicians moved in and out of the pool house. Barbara Watson, ever vigilant, recorded it all in her journal. The boy sat in the back of a police car, staring at nothing. His mother collapsed on the lawn when they brought out the body bag. Sarah Mitchell, who always insisted on perfection, was wheeled away under a sheet stained with her own blood. The aftermath was immediate and devastating. By sunrise, news vans lined Maple Drive. Reporters broadcast live from manicured lawns, telling the world how a widow's obsession and a teenager's confusion had ended in death. Memphis East High School canceled classes for the day. The swim team gathered in their locker room, Kevin's empty locker a silent reminder of how quickly dreams can turn to nightmares. "We found his letter of intent to Texas still in his locker," Coach Thompson would later say, his voice breaking. Everything he'd worked for, everything his mother had sacrificed for, gone in one night of madness. Detective Torres, walking through the pool house at dawn, found the final piece of the puzzle. Sarah's phone, cracked but still functioning. Her last unsent text message to Kevin read, "If I can't have you, no one will." By noon on September 4th, Kevin Anderson was formally charged with manslaughter. Lisa Anderson mortgaged her home for his bail. And in the perfectly maintained gardens of Magnolia Heights, neighbors who had watched this tragedy unfold whispered about how they had seen it coming but done nothing to stop it. The most tragic part, Detective Torres would later write in his final report, wasn't just the death of Sarah Mitchell. It was watching how a combination of loneliness, obsession, and secrets could destroy not just two lives, but an entire community's sense of safety and trust. The Memphis Police Department's investigation into Sarah Mitchell's death began in the pre-dawn hours of September 4, 2018. Detective Michael Torres, a veteran of Memphis homicide, arrived at 1242 Maple Drive at 2:15 a.m. to find a scene that would challenge even his experienced eye. The pool house told multiple stories Torres would later write in his official report. A planned escape, evidenced by packed bags and airline tickets. A violent confrontation, marked by broken glass and blood spatter. And beneath it all, a tragedy months in the making. Crime Scene Unit Chief Maria Sanchez spent 72 hours processing the scene. Her team collected over 200 pieces of evidence, including Sarah's cracked iPhone, blood-stained love letters, and security camera hard drives that would prove crucial to the prosecution's case. The blood spatter analysis was definitive, Sanchez testified. The victim fell backward, striking the corner of the desk with significant force. The angle and impact patterns suggested a push rather than an intentional strike. Digital forensics proved particularly revealing. Despite their attempts at secrecy, Sarah and Kevin had left an extensive electronic trail. The Cybercrimes Unit recovered 2,847 text messages between their burner phones, 126 hours of security footage from the pool house, $243,000 in bank transfers, multiple flight searches to non-extradition countries. The timeline reconstruction placed Kevin at the scene for exactly 23 minutes. Every moment was captured on camera, Torres noted. From his arrival at 12:03 a.m. to his departure at 12:26 a.m., we could account for every second. Witness interviews painted a picture of escalating obsession. Barbara Watson provided months of detailed journal entries. The school counselor shared records of Kevin's declining academic performance. Even the local Cartier boutique manager testified about Sarah's unusual purchases for a younger relative. Kevin Anderson's arrest on September 7, 2018, made national headlines. The charges: manslaughter in the second degree. The perp walk from police headquarters to the courthouse became iconic. A 17-year-old swimming champion in handcuffs, his future drowning in the consequences of a fatal attraction. The state recognizes the complexity of this case, District Attorney Eleanor Martinez announced. We have a deceased woman who exploited a minor, but also a young man who took a life. Justice must balance both truths. The defense strategy, led by prominent attorney James Sullivan, focused on Sarah's manipulation of a minor. This wasn't murder, Sullivan argued in his opening statement. This was the tragic end to a pattern of adult exploitation. My client was as much a victim as the deceased. The prosecution, however, had the security footage. Frame by frame, they showed the jury the final confrontation. Sarah's attempts to prevent Kevin's departure. The struggle. The fatal push. Expert testimony became crucial. Dr. Patricia Chen, the medical examiner, confirmed the cause of death: blunt force trauma to the occipital region, consistent with impact against the desk corner. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. Psychologist Dr. Robert Nash testified about grooming behaviors and trauma responses. The defendant exhibited classic signs of manipulation by an authority figure. The gifts, the secrets, the isolation from family, these are textbook patterns. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Lisa Anderson attended every day, watching her son from the gallery as his swimming achievements were reframed as evidence of his strength. Strength that made the fatal push more damning in the prosecution's narrative. Barbara Watson's testimony proved particularly compelling. Reading from her journal, she reconstructed months of observations. July 15th, saw Kevin leaving Sarah's at 3 a.m. July 22nd, Sarah buying him expensive gifts at the mall. August 1st, obvious intimate moment by the pool. I watched this disaster unfold like a Greek tragedy. The school counselor's records painted a picture of systematic decline. Dropping grades, missed practices, withdrawn behavior. It was like watching someone slowly drown. She testified, and being unable to throw a lifeline. The verdict came down on October 23, 2018. After 14 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kevin Anderson guilty of manslaughter in the second degree, but with a recommendation for leniency given the circumstances. Judge Harold Matthews, known for his strict sentences, surprised the courtroom with his ruling. The court cannot ignore the unique circumstances of this case. The defendant, while legally responsible for Sarah Mitchell's death, was himself a victim of exploitation. I sentence Kevin Anderson to 5 years, with possibility of parole after 3. The sentence acknowledged both the loss of life and the manipulation that led to it. As one juror later told the Memphis Commercial Appeal, there were no winners here, just different degrees of tragedy. Kevin Anderson was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his swimming scholarships replaced by a prison number. Lisa Anderson collapsed in the gallery, her son's future now measured in parole hearings rather than Olympic trials. The legal system worked, Detective Torres would later reflect, but did justice really prevail? A woman is dead, a young man's life is derailed, and a community is left wondering how they missed the signs until it was too late. The ripple effects of Sarah Mitchell's death and Kevin Anderson's conviction spread through Memphis like poison in still water. Lisa Anderson, once respected as a dedicated single mother and ER nurse, took a leave of absence from Methodist Hospital. The whispers followed her even in the antiseptic halls where she had worked for 15 years. I lost everything, Lisa would tell Dateline NBC in their special Death in a Perfect Suburb. My son, my home, my community. Even my patients looked at me differently, wondering how I didn't see what was happening under my own roof. The Anderson home, mortgaged to pay for Kevin's legal defense, sold at a loss. Lisa moved into a small apartment across town, closer to the state prison where her son now lived in a 6-by-8 cell. Magnolia Heights, once Memphis's most coveted address, saw property values plummet. Real estate agent Caroline Parker noted the impact. Houses that listed at $1.2 million dropped to $800,000 overnight. Nobody wanted to live where that happened. Every pool house became a reminder. Memphis East High School struggled with the aftermath. The swim team, once state champions, couldn't shake the shadow of their former captain's fall. Coach Thompson resigned at the end of the semester, telling the school board, "Some stains don't wash out of the water." The media coverage was relentless. National news vans camped on Maple Drive for weeks. Cougar killer or victim screamed tabloid headlines. True crime podcasts dissected every detail, turning neighbors' testimonies into downloadable entertainment. Barbara Watson, whose detailed journals had helped convict Kevin, found her own role in the tragedy haunting her retirement. I watched it happen, wrote it all down, but I never spoke up until it was too late. Support groups emerged from the wreckage. Mothers Against Predatory Relations, MAPR, formed in Sarah's own church basement, ironically led by Lisa Anderson. "If we can save one child, prevent one family's destruction," she told supporters, "then maybe some good can come from this nightmare." September 2023 found Magnolia Heights changed beyond recognition. The Mitchell house, unsold for years, was finally demolished. In its place, the community built a meditation garden, though locals noted how few people actually used it. Kevin Anderson, released after 3 years for good behavior, moved to Seattle where his aunt lived. "Too many ghosts in Memphis," his mother explained to former neighbors. He never swam competitively again. The case sparked legislative change. The Mitchell-Anderson Act passed in Tennessee, requiring schools to provide comprehensive training on recognizing and reporting inappropriate student-adult relationships. Memphis East High School instituted the most rigorous supervision protocols in the state. Security cameras, once focused on external threats, now monitored every interaction between students and adults. The swimming program never fully recovered. The prevention program, See Something, Save Someone, became mandatory in all Memphis schools. Barbara Watson, seeking redemption, became its most passionate speaker. "We all think it can't happen in our neighborhood," she would tell parents. "That's exactly why it does." Lisa Anderson's support group expanded nationwide, with chapters in 30 states. She dedicated her life to educating parents about the subtle signs she had missed. Her speaking engagements at nursing conferences focused on helping healthcare workers recognize exploitation patterns. The trauma lingered in unexpected ways. Property records showed that every home with a pool house in Magnolia Heights either removed it or converted it to open-air cabanas. The neighborhood pool, once a social hub, stood eerily empty most summers. Detective Torres, who retired in 2022, kept the case file on his desk until his last day. "Some cases change you," he reflected in his retirement interview. "This one changed a whole community's innocence." Perhaps most telling was the memorial plaque in the meditation garden. After heated community debate, it read simply, "For those we failed to protect. May we learn. May we watch. May we speak." The Memphis Commercial Appeals 5-year retrospective noted how the case had become a cautionary tale taught in criminal justice classes across the country. The Mitchell-Anderson tragedy, the article concluded, reminds us that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk not in the shadows, but in plain sight, behind perfect lawns and pristine facades. Lisa Anderson's final public statement, made on the 5th anniversary of Sarah's death, perhaps best captured the lasting impact. "We all thought we were living in a perfect neighborhood, where things like this couldn't happen." That illusion of perfection was exactly what allowed this tragedy to unfold. The cameras caught everything except what mattered: our failure to protect our children, even from those who claimed to love them. Magnolia Heights never regained its status as Memphis's premier suburb. But perhaps that was fitting, a reminder that no amount of wealth or prestige can protect a community that chooses to look away until it's too late.